Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The 12-hour flight to Thailand was wearing on me, and with another 12 hours to go, the cramped economy seat felt more like a torture chamber with every passing minute. Fatigue was setting in, but it was accompanied by a buzz of excitement. I was on my way to becoming an expatriate, or expat, as they're called in Thailand. 2 years after my divorce, I had finally cashed in my chips. I took my share of the house equity, half the savings, and a secret nest egg my ex-wife never knew about, and set course for the land of smiles, planning to settle there for good. With my resources, I could enjoy a comfortable retirement. Eventually, when I became eligible to tap into my 401k, I'd have even more financial freedom. My ex had tried to claim a share of that, but I reminded her that I had enough evidence of her infidelity to send to everyone we knew, including her parents. That was enough for her to back down. Sometimes I think about sending it anyway, just out of spite. My feelings for her have boiled down to pure hatred for the betrayal and destruction she brought into my life. In the end, the divorce was relatively smooth. We went with irreconcilable differences rather than adultery, though she deserved to have her actions laid bare. I wasn't interested in wasting my energy on revenge. I just wanted to move on and escape as far as possible from the memories and the pain. I had been to Thailand 20 years earlier when I was in the service. I liked the food, weather, and the women, so I decided to begin my new life there. I needed the change. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Things had to be a lot different there after all these years. I certainly was not the same man. The wounds from too many battles left me tired and scarred. I figured whatever fate awaited me had to be better than the hellish loneliness that I left behind. My name is Arthur, Arthur Lee Allen. I know what you're thinking. It's not my fault. My mother was a big fan of American Western history, especially gunslingers, hence the name. I kind of liked it. In Thailand, the name would hold no special meaning. Everything would be new there. I would be a stranger in a very strange land. I had nothing to lose. My son, who rarely spoke to me, was about to finish college. The only women I was able to date back in New York were divorced, overweight, bitter, and carrying more baggage than a freight train. At 49, I was in pretty good shape with a touch of gray in my hair. I was often told that I didn't look a day over 35. I certainly wasn't ready to pack it in. Since there wasn't a lot of sex going on for me after the divorce, the gym became my sanctuary. My abs are flat and my muscles hard. I was never much of a ladies' man, shy, I guess. Some ego reinforcement and a chance to regroup were badly needed. I yearned to feel manly again and in control of my life. "You look deep in thought, young man," said the man sitting directly to my right. I hadn't said much to him during the trip. He looked to be about 60-something. His face showed the wisdom of a life hard-lived. He seemed to sense my mood. I just left my entire life back in the States. I sure hope I'm doing the right thing." "You'll be fine, son," he said, smiling. "I'm Gary Francis," he said, extending his hand. He had the quiet bearing of a man who knew what he was talking about. "I'm Arthur, Arthur Lee Allen. Pleased to meet you," I answered, reading his mind. He didn't comment on the name. The old man looked glad for the company. "Glad to meet you, Arthur. I've lived in Thailand 22 years. I have often thought of moving back to the States, but I never will. I will spend my last days in Thailand. I guess you could say I'm a battle-hardened old veteran of the game." I thought of him as the old man in the military sense of using the term to describe a respected commanding officer. "Game? What game?" I said, now intrigued. He looked at me with the patience of a wise and seasoned teacher. The use of the word son drew me to him. For some reason, I trusted him immediately. "You will experience some of the most selfless acts of kindness and generosity imaginable, as well as considerable lies, deceit, and manipulation for the purpose of separating you from your cash. It's the way it is, their way of life. You are about to enter a world of fantasy, son. For them, it's about survival. Pensions and social security are not the rule there. For most Thais, there is no safety net. The object of the game is to survive their world with your wallet, integrity, and pride intact while having as much fun as possible. Many a man has checked his brain at the airport and lived to regret it." He shared with me much of what he had learned. I felt like I should be taking notes. I paid real close attention to his words. I suddenly started to feel overwhelmed and anxious. "You've got to understand that the rules will be different when you leave this plane." "What are the rules?" "Well, to start with, you have never seen so many available beautiful young women. Smile, and they will treat you better than you could ever imagine. Many will try to train you, then exploit you. It can be difficult to sort out what is real. Believe half of what you see and nothing of what you hear. For example, the lady boys are some of the most beautiful women you will see. The Thais call them Katois. Ladyboys? Is that like gay? I asked, innocently. More than gay, they are pre-op and post-op transsexuals. Some of them are truly amazing. It's all an illusion. Much of what you think you see will be an illusion. That's just the beginning. The famous Thai smile is both a sword and a shield. It doesn't mean the same thing as a smile back home. If they smile, you smile. It's also your sword and shield. You will learn as you go along. Just remember, don't surrender your power and make yourself happy. It's time in your life to think about your needs. Compromise is okay, but don't sacrifice too much. Stay in control, stay strong. Set limits and see with your eyes and brain, not your little willy. If something doesn't feel correct, it probably isn't. Thai women have no respect for a chicken, so don't allow that to happen. Why would I do that? In Thailand, it's easier than you would think. A guy like you is a ripe target. You want companionship and sex. They want money. You are not the predator in the land of smiles. You're the prey. They will strip your wallet and heart to the bone and laugh at you for being stupid enough to let them. I struggled to absorb all of what he said. One more thing. Feel free to fall in love. That is with a different lady every day. We expats call them LBFMs. What's that? Little brown sex machines, Gary answered, smiling as his mind flashed back to another place and time. Most of the ladies of the night are not wife material. They are prostitutes. Some idiots call them sex workers. If she sells sex for a living, she's a prostitute. If she's been in the game longer than a month or two, forget about it. She's damaged goods. Don't forget that. Treat them with respect, pay them in the morning, and send them on their way. Their jealousy and possessiveness are based on ownership of clients, not love. It looks like affection or love, but that's not what it is. Play with them, as they are most certainly are playing with you. And don't put up with any shit. If she starts to throw things or get violent, put her out. That's how you play the game, son. Is that all I have to look forward to? Don't get me wrong. If you find a so-called good girl, you might find a woman that would make an excellent life companion. Look for them in areas away from where Farang usually go. However, their family and friends will usually have higher priority than you. If you are real lucky, you might find one that thinks more like a girl back home. Ironically, it's their exotic nature that's so appealing. At the same time, it's like dealing with creatures from another planet. Beware, my friend. Many good girls have adopted the tactics of their more unscrupulous sisters. Learn some Thai. If you don't let them know that you understand their conversations, you'll learn a lot. Farang. It means foreigner. Often it is used negatively by Thais. You will never be totally accepted by Thai society. You and I will always be foreigners. Yours odds improve if she is educated and older than 30. The young girls are just too full of themselves. Most of them don't realize they have a short self-life. Just don't look for your dream girl in a go-go bar. Think of them as attractions in an adult Disneyland. A nice place to visit, but you don't want to live there. The working girls are fun. Accept them for what they are. Love him and leave him. One more thing. Remember, the Farang always pays. They know you are richer than them, therefore, they feel no guilt about you picking up the tab. Good luck, son. You're going to need it. Every day will be an adventure. Expect the unexpected. Don't expect the law to offer any protection. The biggest mafia in the country are the police. Thanks, I'll remember what you said. At least my eyes will be open when the plane lands. I owe you. I hope that our paths cross again. I'm sure we'll talk again, he replied. Your advice is greatly appreciated. I don't know if I'm ready for this. He gave me his phone number. I knew I would be calling him, sooner or later. The plane landed, and we set off to follow our individual destinies. As soon as I left the airport, the Bangkok air enveloped me. It was hot and humid. I started sweating immediately. The air smelled of unknown plant life, auto exhaust, Thai spices, and elements I could not identify. It would take me a while before I adjusted to my new home. I bought a condo and settled into my new life. The next several months were a haze of bars and women. Each promised to love me long time as long as I bought them drinks, paid the bar fine, the fee to take a girl out of the bar, and paid them about 2,000 baht, $50 to $60, the next morning. I never forgot that it was all about the money. All of them very happy to see my money. They truly loved my wallet. As soon as I would enter my favorite bar, I would be surrounded by 3 or 4 near-naked women. I was aware that what I truly wanted, I couldn't buy. A very pretty girl told me that she missed every day and she happy for my return. That was strange. I had never seen her before. I met many expats who had been playing the game for years. They were dedicated sex-mongers, commonly called punters. To each his own, I guess. None that I met seemed really happy. They drank a lot and complained about the Thai way of doing things constantly. After a while, It looked like I had traded one kind of hell for another. They seemed to be lonely even with two beautiful girls sitting on their lap. To me, life had to have some meaning greater than mindless hedonistic self-gratification. Sex without love or real intimacy gets old real quick. Every place I went in Soy Cowboy, Nana Plaza, and Pat Pong, I was greeted with, "Hi, handsome man. What your name? You want buy me drink and pay bar fine me? Oh, you so big. Where you stay? Let's go your hotel. I love you too much." They were all different, yet the same. I couldn't believe my eyes when I entered my first go-go bar. It was Susie Wong's, I think, in Soy Cowboy. There were at least 40 topless dancers flirting with big-bellied customers from all over the world. Some of them danced, while others shuffled their feet. Many of the men were obnoxious and drunk, and the women were young and sexy. The music was loud and smoke hung heavy in the air. It struck me as a strip club on steroids. Every female in sight was on sale. The dancers wore numbers. All a man had to do was tell them a massin what number he wanted, and the dancer would come to his table to talk business. Most wanted a quick short-time trip to a nearby hotel so they could get back and try it again. The entire place, and the others like it, was a commercial sex machine. If a guy was looking to get laid, he was in the right place. I soon found out that the bar fine was usually around $15, 500 to 600 baht. Following Gary's advice, I fell in love every day with Tip, Noi, Korn, Da, and a number of others whose names I can't remember. They were not like professional sex workers in the States. Most tried to provide a girlfriend experience for a price. Often money would not be mentioned until the next morning. How much I gave a lady was up to me. The usual rate for a long-time visit, one night, was about 2,000 baht, $50 to $60. At least, I got the pleasure of a beautiful, cooperative woman for a couple of hours or a night. I wondered how long I could live on a steady diet of make-believe bullshit. How many guys have spent big bucks at home trying to impress some self-absorbed, spoiled female with his ability to provide and ended up with a peck on the cheek? At least, the hookers I kept company with were honest about their intent. I found them charming, feminine, calculating, and predatory. Nevertheless, I drank too much, stayed up too late, and had too much loveless, meaningless sex. I felt lonely and empty without a woman to call my own. At least, I didn't waste any time thinking about the world I left behind. I woke up one morning with two women in my bed, and I had no idea who they were or how they got there. I realized that I needed more than an endless series of one-night stands. My behavior was out of character. I felt like a dog chasing my own tail. I was sexually drained, yet frustrated. It was the price for becoming a Bangkok warrior, as Gary had put it. Then, my world changed. Lamai came into my life. She was able to read the quiet desperation in my eyes. That ability to sense my need was to cost me dearly later. Lamai was a walking Asian sex machine. I first saw her on the SkyTrain. She was dressed in a business suit which was both very sexy and classy at the same time. She was tall for a Thai, and her skin was lighter due to her Chinese heritage. She was about 5 feet 9 inches in heels. Her short skirt emphasized her long legs. She moved with the grace of a leopard, and her face took my breath away. I couldn't help but smile like a smitten adolescent as my eyes locked onto her. I wanted to run my fingers through her raven black hair which flowed down her back. I was in love. She noticed my gaze and returned my smile. She looked to be an office worker of some kind. She had a class about her that separated her from the Isen peasant girls I had been sleeping with. I found out later that she an office temp. At least, that's what she said. I quickly introduced myself and was relieved that her English was pretty good. I asked if she could meet me somewhere for coffee, dinner, a walk in the park, anything. She said she could meet me at Starbucks on Succumbit Road at 6 p.m. We met and my life took a new turn. Time passed quickly. She was easy to get along with and curious about many things. I told her about my life back in the States and how I hoped to meet someone in Thailand to settle down with. Her eyes seemed to light up when I told her that. I wanted to believe the light in her eyes was showing genuine interest in me and not dollar signs. I like Farong Min. Thai man no good. He butterflies too much, cannot trust, she said, searching my face for a reaction. I need man who want to take care of me, and I take good care of him. I 28 now, getting old. I thought to myself, here we go, the same old bullshit. Old? This woman is a vision, a work of art, I thought to myself. In the States, she would stop traffic and cause old men to have heart attacks. She had no idea of how pretty she actually was. Where I came from, men would pay just to talk with her. In Thailand, she was one of many. She didn't look like she was old to me. Lamai was at that age when women begin to blossom to full womanhood. Her easygoing feminine ways felt like quicksand to me, as I was pulled in deeper and deeper. She told me she had to work 7 days a week sometimes and made only 10,000 baht a month, about $260. From that, she had to pay for rent, food, car fare, and send money to her family in the province. She was raised near the northern city of Chiang Rai. I didn't detect any self-pity, just acceptance of her fate. As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel the need to help her, to give her my protection. I hadn't felt like that in many years. She wasn't a bar girl. I felt safe with her. I decided to try to be Prince Charming. I know, big mistake. I choked back the nagging warnings that Gary had planted in my head, yet they were always there. I proceeded to explore the possibilities with caution. Do you have a boyfriend? No, no boyfriend. I was married before. He no good, drink too much and spend money at casino. He has a minor wife. She calls house sometimes, 'cause big trouble. Then, he beat me and tell me he leaving. I not see him again and cry a lot. I wanted to kick his butt for hurting her. She somehow brought out my protective instincts. I knew what Gary would say if I told him that was falling so hard for Lamai so soon. He would say, "Watch your back, son." She seemed different from the sharks I had been warned about and had associated with in the bars. I wanted to believe she really was different. I decided to proceed with caution. I think you kind and good man. I can read you. You need lady care for you. Many Thais ladies like you very much. I don't care about many Thais ladies. I want you to like me. Why? I think you are beautiful and a nice person too. I'm not so special. Many Thais ladies like me. Maybe, you know like me much when you know me better. I wondered if she was trying to tell me something. I didn't want to think about that. How did you learn English so well? I go to English school and pick up here and there. You think I talk good? Better than most? I was just curious. I knew that frequent contact with Farangs was how bar girls learned basic English. The first time we made love, I fell in love. Her body was firm and soft at the same time. Her skin, like fine Asian silk, was addictive. We started make slow, passionate love. That didn't last long. Soon, we were devouring each other. All of my pain, frustration, and loneliness came pouring out. I never wanted to let her go. Melting into one another, passion and lust overwhelmed me. I couldn't get enough of her. We made love until exhaustion overtook me. The next morning I woke up to her climbing onto my manhood. It was pure sex, just wild sensuality and pleasure. I loved it. Then, she gave me a massage that made me horny again. It scared me to feel that happy and young again. Despite my resolution to control myself, I was becoming more vulnerable by the minute. Weeks and months passed. Lamai was all I ever wanted or needed in a woman. It didn't take long before I wanted her to move in with me. When I mentioned it, she said, maybe soon, and changed the subject. Having all of the advantages and none of the disadvantages of a live-in girlfriend worked for me. There was no rush. I let it drop. Things were fine the way we were. I felt like a king. She was with me almost every evening. She washed my clothes, cooked for me, cleaned my condo, and gave me mind-blowing sex as often as could handle it. She never asked for money, and her favorite expression was, "Up to you." We went to many places together. Lamai was always close by, discreetly touching me in some way. I couldn't believe I was in a relationship that did not require constant compromise or argument. She never once flirted with another man. I enjoyed their envious looks when we were out together. Whenever I took her someplace or bought her a present, she always showed appreciation for my thoughtfulness. I couldn't believe my luck. We took care of each other. I needed to do something to fill my time while Lamai was at work. I found an orphanage not far from where I lived and began to teach English. The kids were fun, and I loved spending time with them. I don't know if I was any good at it, but the kids loved me, and they became important to my existence. I met some dedicated people at the orphanage. There was a young teacher there whose friendly help and pretty face caught my eye. Her name was Thung. I decided not to pursue her. She'd secretly would look at me with inviting eyes, but I was determined to be faithful to Lamai. Thung was the kind of woman that would fully expect the man she had sex with to marry her. She was the definition of a good girl. Temptation to stray was everywhere. In massage parlors, beer bars, and just strolling down the street. I had enough on my plate with Lamai. She didn't leave me with enough energy to deal with other women. When I wasn't teaching, I went to Thai language school. In time, my comprehension became pretty good. My ability to actually speak Thai progressed more slowly. Remembering what Gary had said, I kept my knowledge to myself. It was astounding to hear what Thais said in the presence of Farong. They have this ability to call a Farong the son of soy dog or water buffalo as they smiled in your face. The love for Farong was not nearly equal to their love of Farong money. For some reason, I didn't let Lamai know that I was studying Thai and could understand some of her phone conversations. I needed more time to completely trust her. Her mysterious nature was both exotic and somehow threatening. She often said that Farang who know too much no good. I wondered why she would think that. I knew that all women have their secrets, especially Thai women. I wanted access to those secrets before I could lower my guard. She tended to have trouble accounting for where she'd been and what she had been doing from time to time. I decided to sleep with one eye open, so to speak. I watched and waited for any red flags to appear, hoping none would. Anxiety churned inside me. I was not about to trade one bad domestic situation for another. Time would sort things out. After several months, the haze of lust and infatuation had cleared enough for me to start looking at Lamai objectively. She didn't like me asking too many questions about her life. Sometimes, my efforts led to some serious mood swings and tantrums which passed quickly. I tended to avoid confrontations. My world started to unravel when I decided to ask some hard questions after I concluded things were not quite right. Why have I not met your family, Lamai? They live far, far. Don't worry. We go someday soon. Where did you get the money to buy the gold jewelry you have on your salary? Your phone cost at least 6,000 baht. And where do you disappear to for hours sometimes at night? I call you, but your phone is turned off. What's going on? Why you question me? I love you. Why you make trouble? You not trust me? My questions made her angry and agitated. I didn't understand her reaction. I was sensing doom on the horizon. I know you love me, but please answer my questions. Make me feel better. I need to know. We need to be honest with each other. To me, honesty, trust, and loyalty are very important. I will not put up with lying or any break of my trust. You should know this. I want us to be open with each other. I ask for nothing that I am not willing to give you. Do you understand what I'm saying? It is important for our future that you do. Why Farang always talk of trust and honesty? These things not so important in Thailand. Peace and family, keeping face more important. Farang think too much. I wondered what the hell did that mean? I had the strong feeling that my words and attitude confused her. It was as if she could not comprehend what I was getting at. She could not understand why I was making her lose face through my questions and insistence on the truth, which was extremely important to me. Problems tended to happen whenever the conversation became intense. Our normal ability to communicate became difficult when she didn't want to answer a question or deal with something unpleasant. She would use anger or the pretense of language difficulties to change the subject. I wasn't going to let her get away with it this time. You know, love me. You want to keep me in cage. I need freedom. You not understand me. You only care yourself. She was raising her voice, about to go off. Freedom to do what? I pay the bills and take care of you. What the hell are you talking about? Are you cheating on me? Can I trust you? I wasn't going to take any crap or deception. No, no, no. I know cheat. You are man I love. Only you, sweetheart. I visit my friends sometime. Gold from old boyfriend. He from Sweden, gone back long time. You jealous? No good. Now, I sad. Arthur. You make Lamai very sad. She ran into the bathroom and slammed the door. I could see that the conversation was going nowhere. As usual, her answers didn't satisfy me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was either lying or not telling me the whole truth. Before I could consider taking the relationship to the next level, I had to find some answers. Looking back, I was compelled to confirm what my gut was already knew. I needed confirmation. When she came out of the bathroom, she was crying. She ran to me and placed her tear-stained face on my chest. I'm not mad now. I love you too much, sweetheart, she said, dropping to her knees. I was determined to get some answers. Okay, I want to meet your friends. Could I do that? She looked concerned for a minute, then she agreed. The next evening, I found myself in a restaurant filled with Thais. I was the only Farang there. Lamai had invited 5 of her friends to join us. 2 were male. I could understand a little of what was being said. I sat there spacing out, listening to the chatter until I heard one of the males, who she said was her cousin, say something to Lamai. When are you going to make your Farang uncle buy house for you? I know like you sleeping with this ugly water buffalo. You can make him pay 500,000 or maybe 1 million baht sensat. Then, we can be together. Remember, I am your husband. You stink with the smell of this Farang. My first thought was what? Water buffalo. To be called uncle and water buffalo was a major insult and signaled great disrespect. 1 million baht was close to $30,000. Did I hear what I think I heard? Sensat is the Thai version of a bride price. In Thailand, the prospective groom was sometimes expected to pay this to show honor to the bride and her family. Some families extorted this money from Farangs because they could. Sometimes, It was given back to the bride as a kind of marriage insurance. It is a practice that doesn't set too well with most Farangs. Thais expect Farangs to accept their culture and couldn't give a crap about theirs. Lamai and I had never seriously spoken of marriage or Sin Sat. She didn't seem upset by his insults. The scent of betrayal was strong in the air. What was this being together stuff? Husband? My throat tightened with rage, sadness, and pain. Resignation soon followed. I had to accept what I had just heard. I was beginning to feel like an old warrior myself. My world had crashed. Who was this woman? I decided to play the hand out. I wanted to see what would happen next. I controlled the anger building in my heart. I knew revenge was a risky thing in Thailand. There would surely be retaliation from her husband and friends. I needed a plan. However, I was not going to let her get away with her treachery. I thought, how could she do this to me? I wondered what I had done in a past life to deserve this treatment. I treated her like a princess. It appeared that the reason she never pressured me for money was that I was being set up for the big score. I braced myself for the end of my relationship. I tried to wall off my emotions for self-protection. The end was near. I would miss her. I hoped that in her own way, she really did care for me, or did she? She surely didn't define love the way I did. When she used the word, it was hollow, having little or no meaning. I began to wonder if she even liked me. It was hard to believe anybody could be that good of an actress. When the dinner was over, her friends went their way. I heard the man who had been speaking to Lamai earlier say, "Soon you can come back to my bed and leave this stinking big Willie Farong. You should be with me, your husband. Pressure him. Tell him you must be married soon." He smiled at me as he spoke. It was everything I could do to keep from snapping his skinny neck and hers. Lamai laughed at his remarks. She took my arm lovingly as we walked back into the crowded Bangkok street. I had to be patient, but not too patient. I needed time to put my condo up for sale and arranged to move to the northern city of Chiang Mai. After I took my revenge for Lamai's betrayal, I would move far away. Lamai started throwing very strong hints that she wanted me to make an honest woman out of her. When she went to sleep, I searched her purse for the first time. I found 2 phones. One of them had names like Ryan, Nathan, Luke, and Vince stored in it. I resisted the urge to throw the phone out of the window. She had a date book with client names, dates, and hotels. I felt like such a sucker. The times indicated were all between 6 p.m. and 10 o'clock. After work, she was an escort. That's why she never needed to ask me for money. I had to give it to her. She's good. "Sweetheart, do you love me?" she asked in her most vulnerable voice. "Sure, I do. Why do you ask?" The game had begun. "I want us to marry. When I take you to family, I must say that we will marry." "Why?" "I lose big face and family if they know I sleep with you and not marry." I almost laughed in her face. She was using Thai logic on me. What she said was true, even more true when in the provinces. Too bad she was full of crap and already married. I might have been sympathetic. "I think you're right, Lamai. You are a loving, faithful companion. I should marry you. We should marry soon. I want you to be my wife. I will love you forever." "Oh, sweetheart. I'm so happy. I tell family and friends. I want marry in province, so village can come and see my handsome husband. My family will gain much face." She paused for a minute. "You know you give family Sin Sat. It is Thai tradition. Very important. I know about Sin Sat. How much?" "I think 1 million baht." She said it as a question. "A million baht. I'm not rich," I said, playing her game. She thought another minute and said, "Okay, 500,000 would be okay." She looked at me with hopeful eyes. "I think I can do that. It's a heavy price, but I want to make you happy." Tears slid down her face. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn her look portrayed genuine gratitude and love. She hugged me for a long time, not speaking. Her arms trembled. The heat of her hands penetrated my back. She was good. "Sweetheart, I not deserve man like you. I must have been very good in past life. Our love very strong. I love you too much," she said as she seductively stripped for me. Testosterone surged through my veins. If I could not have her loyalty, I would take her body, probably for the last time. I felt like I was cursed to love unfaithful women. "I am going to give you some money. I want you to go home and arrange an engagement party. Invite everyone in the village. Buy lots to eat and drink. Hire a band. You know what to do. Go tomorrow. I will join you in 3 days. I will bring Sin Sat and many baht of gold for all to see when I come to the party. Everyone will be jealous of you. They will know how much I treasure your love and devotion to me." "Devotion? It means being true and loyal," I said, gritting my teeth. Then I took her. not caring about her pleasure, only mine. I did her with anger and lust. Then we rested exhausted in each other's arms, each lost in their own thoughts. She left the next day to set everything up. I rented out my condo and had my possessions shipped to Chiang Mai. On the day of the big party, I called Lamai. Many people will come. Everyone wants to see you, and my sin sought. I want to see you, handsome man. Please hurry. I wait for you every minute. She was very excited. I will be there. Start the party. I will come soon. I love you, bye. I hung up the phone with sadness in my heart. I would never see her again. The loss of face she was about to suffer would be powerful revenge for her betrayal. On the day of the party, there were at least 200 people in attendance. People danced, ate, and drank with abandon. The messenger that I had hired entered the room and went directly to the microphone after whispering something in a band member's ear. He spoke in Thai. Attention, please. I have a message from the man Lamai is supposed to marry. The crowd hushed, a ripple of curiosity spreading through the room. He says he will not be coming tonight. He will not come because Lamai is a lying, cheating woman who doesn't love him. She's already married and planned to divorce her husband after receiving her sin sought and new house. He says his heart is broken and hopes she spends the rest of her life reflecting on what could have been, until she's old and gray. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Lamai, who stood frozen in shock, her face an unreadable mask before twisting into a mixture of rage, embarrassment, and disbelief. She trembled slightly as if every eye in the room burned into her. That damned Farang tricked me, she hissed to her husband, who sat nearby looking equal parts drunk and disappointed. Meanwhile, I was adjusting well to my new life. Chiang Mai's cooler weather and fresher air made it a welcome change from Bangkok. I found a small orphanage and began teaching English again, something that gave me purpose. If I ever craved female company, it wasn't hard to find. All it took was a stroll through certain parts of town to hear the familiar refrain. Hello, handsome man. Where are you from? You want Take Me Hotel for Boom Boom? Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I vividly remember the day I left my hometown. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves. I packed everything I valued into my old pickup truck, determined to start fresh, far from the painful memories. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Betrayal and deceit had ruined my life, and the only way to heal was to distance myself from those who hurt me. After hours of driving, I found a quaint, sleepy town that seemed perfect for a new beginning. The locals were friendly, the pace was slow, and the town had a charming appeal. I discovered a small, rundown gas station and garage that had been on the market for years. Seeing its potential, I made a low offer, which was surprisingly accepted. This property became the foundation for rebuilding my life and business. One Saturday afternoon, I sat quietly in my favorite tavern, enjoying the peace. This tavern became my sanctuary shortly after moving here. I bought the local gas station and repair shop at a bargain price, seeing its untapped potential. The previous owner was eager to sell after it sat on the market for 2 years. It was the perfect place for a fresh start, helping me leave my past behind. The first thing I did was build a large retail store facing the gas station to supply the town after the only grocery store closed at 7 p.m. I moved the tanks so the pumps were visible from the store, which left plenty of parking spaces for customers. The store was busiest from 7 p.m. to midnight and was open 24/7. The garage at the back of the lot was open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, with special projects on Saturdays. Although the bar was initially upset when we started selling basic liquor, it eventually provided a good income and created needed jobs in the community. The business became very successful after restructuring the store's internal merchandising, thanks to a woman I hired. It quickly repaid the equity loan and required doubling the staff due to high demand. On Friday and Saturday nights, we sold lots of junk food to bar patrons, and on Sundays, we sold plenty of cold beer at reasonable prices. I was sipping a double shot of Jack Daniels with ice water and lemon, having just finished replacing the steering column in an old truck, a family heirloom. It took me 8 months to find the part and fabricate some fixtures. His family had driven this truck since the 40s, and he had no plans to stop. If he could, he would be buried in it. 4 to 7 was the best time at the bar since most regulars had already had dinner. In a couple of hours, the place would be filled with a musical crowd. Farmers brought their daughters for after-work fun. In my 6.5 years here, I built a solid reputation and made many friends. The locals looked out for each other and kept me informed of anything unusual. I came to the bar once a week, always on Saturdays, for a drink before heading home. It was my quiet time to gather my thoughts. I saw them walk in and wished I hadn't. They ruined a perfect day. The woman was my ex's twin sister, and the young man with her was once my son. It brought back memories I didn't want. I realized you can't see evil when you live with it. The boy had grown up and looked more like his biological father. This proved the truth always comes out. Why were they looking for me now? They chatted with the bartender, showed him a picture, and then left. I was grateful for my long, unkempt hair, beard, and mustache, which made me look different, especially since I had lost weight. No one noticed the message I sent, which simply said, "Come home when I can." About a half hour later, the bartender came over and sat at my table. "What did they want, Tom?" I asked. "They wanted to give you a message. They heard a rumor you live here and came to check it out," Tom replied. "They said a woman named Willa is dying of cancer and wants to make peace. I asked for your picture, pretending not to recognize your name. Who are they, and what do they want?" I took out a cigarette, ripped off the filter, and lit it. "The woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The young man is my ex-wife's illegitimate son, whom she passed off as mine for years. Based on your experience, do you think they were telling the truth?" I asked. "From their body language, I'd say they're partly honest, but hiding something big," Tom replied. I nodded. My ex-wife and her sister had always been deceptive, appearing genuine while betraying me. Tom went back behind the bar. My thoughts drifted to nearly 7 years ago when I left, promising not to return for another 7 years. They laughed at me, thinking I was a fool. They learned a hard lesson that day because they never saw or heard from me directly again. They didn't believe how serious or hurt I was. They thought I was just mad at their joke. They had no idea that a few weeks earlier I discovered our youngest child was my brother-in-law's son. That revelation started my journey to this moment. A family member who had seen Willa and Tammy, the evil twins, betray me too often, provided the proof. She called them black witches practicing pure evil. Earlier that week, before I left, we discovered a new insurance policy on me with double indemnity for accidental pass-away, totaling $4 million if I died. A wise old woman told me to flee. When I left for my work truck, they had no clue. It was already packed with everything I wanted from my 16-year marriage. I drove away without looking back and ended up 2 states away. Part of this was my fault since I got Willa pregnant when she was 16 and I was 18. My family convinced me to marry her, and soon we had 2 more kids. They thought it was hilarious. Willa told our daughters, "Your father will come back when he cools off. He needs to regain his sense of humor." A few hours later, a sheriff's car arrived at the house. Willa greeted him at the door. "Are you Mrs. Willa Racine?" he asked. When she said yes, he replied, "Mom, you've just been served." She laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when she opened the envelope, she realized I had dissolved our marriage without a second thought. The grand dame told me she was shocked. My attorney listed all our assets and liabilities, including a DNA report showing the affair lasted a year. The divorce petition included details, receipts, and photos from their hotel meetings. In the envelope was a letter revealing I was suing her husband for child support, infidelity, and defamation. Their laughter stopped. The joke was no longer on me. I had the last laugh. Their joke was that I was only good for making money. Everything I touched seemed to turn to gold, so Willa and the kids were spoiled and never needed anything. Later, Willa found out I had sold 3 of our businesses, paid off all debt, and sold our 2 apartment buildings for a profit. I canceled all credit cards, removed my name from bank accounts, and signed over my half of the house to her. I took half our worth in cash, reducing our cash flow from $10,000 a month to 0. Willa's sister learned the cost of using me. My attorney froze their assets before they got the subpoena, leaving them broke after the divorce. My attorney called Willa in after the divorce and reimbursed her for a quarter of their losses. "Why would he do that?" she asked. My lawyer replied, "For him, it was never about the money. It was about principle. He hopes this money gives you a chance to start over and learn from your experience." Willa refused to agree to the divorce without speaking to me, leaving us legally separated but not divorced. I had no need to talk to someone who lied to me for years. She had to work for the first time, learning that money disappears quickly without income. I had my attorney forward important mail to a rented FedEx mailbox, which was then sent to my work address weekly. I did this knowing that Willa and her sister loved to manipulate and plan revenge. I knew they would eventually try to get back at me. It wasn't a question of if, but when. Their family didn't believe in leaving things be, and my absence would upset them. The longer this went on, the worse their payback would be. They wouldn't let it go easily. Until now, I thought I had succeeded in escaping. With Tammy's appearance, I realized their game wasn't over. I finished my drink and left through the back door, in case they were watching the front. I crossed the empty lot behind the house and walked around the block to my pickup. As I was unlocking the door, a man approached and said, "You're a hard man to find, mister." "Arthur, Seth Racine, no doubt," I said. "How do you know that? My name is Peter Edwards." "Your oldest daughter, Connie, is my wife," he replied. "That could be a blessing or a curse," I said, "if she acts like her mother, so why are you here?" "I came looking for you," he said. "Some things need to be settled." "That would be the case if your mother-in-law would just sign the divorce agreement," I said. "What divorce agreement?" Peter asked in surprise. I told him to follow me. We drove through town, then onto a long driveway leading to a farmhouse. Inside my home office, I showed him the divorce papers and let him make copies. Peter didn't need to know that I didn't live there. I had built it for the Grand Dame, hoping she would eventually leave her old home. Peter was a pleasant-looking, confident, and seemingly educated young man. I wondered if he was who he claimed or part of Willa and Tammy's scheme. He used my Wi-Fi to download files onto his laptop. All important records were stored there, with a master copy in a safety deposit box. He was interested in a copy of the sheriff's report Willa signed when served with the summons. He managed to print a damaging letter from Willa's attorney to mine, acknowledging the agreed property division, but refusing to finalize the divorce without my in-person meeting. While Peter worked, I observed his expressions and saw that he was learning new information. My paperwork contradicted what he believed. "Do you think Connie knows?" Peter asked. "That's something you'll have to find out," I replied. "Here's a question for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer?" "Who told you that?" Peter asked. "Tammy and Seth told a bartender that today. But I know Willa is fine. She's in a common law marriage with her former lawyer and is expecting his second child." Peter said, "She's the one who asked me to find you to start the divorce. She claims it's necessary so she can remarry." He called his wife and put it on speakerphone so I could hear. "Connie, did you know your mother lied about the divorce not being finalized?" Peter asked. "What are you talking about?" Connie replied. "Mom told us Dad abandoned us and cleaned out whatever was left before leaving town. If it wasn't for our stepfather, we wouldn't have survived." "I'm sending you the legal file," said Peter. "Read it and contact me as soon as possible." While they talked, I grabbed 2 bottles of Bud, opened them, and put one in front of him. "Why didn't you tell my daughter you found me?" I asked. "Connie and I have only been married 2 years, and we just had a son 3 months ago. For now, I'm not going to tell anyone I found you," Peter said. "Everyone thinks I'm investigating a case." He showed me his badge, confirming he was a police officer for the Paradise Police Department. I checked the department's webpage on my laptop, proving he was telling the truth. "It was the accident report from a few months ago that led me to you," Peter explained. "Connie wrote a report on your disappearance, which was forwarded to the wanted list. The insurance company informed me of the ruling in your favor." "So why didn't you tell Connie you found me?" I asked again. "After reviewing your file, it became clear something else might be going on," Peter said. "I wondered what happened to the $250,000 cash Willa was supposed to get along with the house deed. And why are they all lying about what really happened?" "Yeah, sounds like I've been fed lies too," I said as his phone rang. "It's my wife. I'll put it on speaker," Peter said. "Please keep it down." "Hi, honey," Connie said. "Where did you get all this from? Is it true? We've been lied to for years. Seth doesn't know his origins, and neither do I. My sister Karen will be shocked. Mom chastised her for defending Dad. They don't speak anymore. This story contradicts everything we've been told. Mom and Auntie gave Dad no choice. They've been manipulating his life for years. What bothers me is that the divorce isn't finalized because Mom won't sign it. What's really going on?" "It's true. I got the information from your father's lawyer's widow. I had to go out of state to find her. Her husband kept duplicates of all his records. From the paperwork, it looks like your mother was served with a divorce petition the same day he left," Peter said. "I wrote a note for Connie to talk to her great-aunt Josie if she was still alive." Peter nodded. "Pete, it's crucial to find my father now," Connie said. "He deserves to be free of Mom and her schemes, at least to finalize the divorce. What happened to the money she got? Why did she have to sell the house if it was hers? The more I look into this, the more I wonder what's going on and why she planned to sue him for desertion as soon as she found him. Ask my sister to watch our son a bit longer, and you talk to Aunt Josie about what we found." Maybe she'll open up, Peter said. This must stay between us for now. It looks like there may be serious fraud. Why has your mother been slandering your father for years? I'll need to talk to the district attorney. The $250,000 cash disappeared once it reached your father's lawyer. Don't tell your sister yet. If the DA investigates, it's best no one else knows. I got up to get us some servings, giving Peter privacy until he finished his call. Why do you want Connie to talk to Aunt Josie? Peter asked. Josie gathered all the information about Willa and George's affair, I said. She never married but watched over the family like a mother, raising her only daughter. Being a single mom changed her perspective. She thought Tammy and Willa conspired and used George and me, but their ultimate goal is unclear. If it's true, why? Peter asked. Aunt Josie's granddaughter Jody wants her to move in with her, but Josie insists on waiting until the truth comes out. Jody visits with her 2 sons. Jody leads a very withdrawn life, I said. Socializing with Willa and Tammy takes a toll on everyone. They've used people most of their lives. It wasn't until Josie gave me the material that I realized this. Do you want to ask me about your children before I leave? Peter asked. Not until I know you're who you say you are, I replied. This could be another part of their game. Look into the sudden pass away of my lawyer, because if she's planning to sue me, what makes her think she can win? Peter's face turned white, realizing what kind of people he had married. We decided to trust each other enough to exchange numbers. He promised to keep me informed. I walked him to the door, shook his hand, and said goodbye. After he left, I cleaned up, locked the apartment, and took the long way home to ensure I wasn't followed, giving me time to think. My life had improved since putting the past behind me. Did I want to relive it all again? Knowing Willa and Tammy, I had to prepare for what was coming, as they'd go to any length for money. As soon as I walked through the door, 2 little kids grabbed my legs. I picked up my 3- and 4-year-olds, the apples of my eye, just like their mother. I felt blessed to have all 3 of them in my life. My wife, Jody, called out that dinner was almost ready, so I went to wash up. Over dinner, I told her about my day since closing the store. I couldn't have imagined my life turning out like this when I left Paradise almost 7 years ago. I promised my grandmother, Josie, that I would keep in touch, and I did, calling her every Sunday. About 1.25 years ago, she called me for help. Her granddaughter, Jody, needed to escape a failed marriage and find a safe place to start over. Jody, 10 years younger than me, had no children and lived on an army base out of state. I didn't know much about her, but I owed Josie and was glad to help. It took me a week to find and partially furnish a 2-bedroom apartment for her in a small town, which was nearly impossible without a friend's help. When I arrived to pick up Jody, she had quit her job, emptied her bank accounts, and packed her bags. Her husband was about to enlist in the army after his last 2-week training exercise. I quietly arrived around 8 p.m. with a rented U-Haul truck. With the help of a few neighbors and friends, we moved everything she wanted into the truck. I left her town in under 4 hours, refusing to say where I was from for safety. As we drove back, Jody and I started to get to know each other. Late that night, she got a call from her grandmother. I smiled when she said, "Yes, Grandma, Art picked me up. You could have warned me he's a wild bushman who might look half decent if he cleaned up." The next day, Josie contacted Jody's attorney to have all her legal documents sent to my FedEx box. Jody warned that her soon-to-be ex-husband could cause trouble, so I took steps to protect her. Jody then took over managing my store and proved to be an excellent manager, making successful changes and prioritizing customer needs. Her personality attracted many new clients, and she established a well-organized, problem-free staff. Josie had to get a restraining order against Jody's ex due to his constant threats. He was dishonorably discharged and moved back to my old hometown, thinking Jody would be there. To keep unwanted attention at bay, Jody wore a diamond ring, which helped her adjust to her new life. She handled banking and bookkeeping, gaining everyone's acceptance as I had introduced her. Jody's honesty and personality made her wonderful, and her long black hair was often hidden from her face. When asked about her ring, she replied, "I'm sure you'll figure it out," sparking rumors that she was my future mail-order bride. She started bringing me lunch on Saturdays, as I often forgot to eat while working, resulting in weight loss. Our relationship grew naturally. Everyone assumed we were a couple, and Josie kept us updated on events back home. We became curious when we learned Jody's ex was friendly with Tammy. The day Jody's divorce was finalized, our relationship deepened. We celebrated with friends at the local bar, sharing our first kiss during a slow dance under dim lights. 6 months later, we moved in together. While the kids were bathing, I shaved off my beard and mustache, leaving only stubble. The kids watched in amazement. I soaped my face and theirs with the bowl and brush Jody bought me for Christmas, much to their delight. Jody walked in, surprised to see the kids giggling with soapy faces as I finished shaving. "It looks like Daddy would look like you with a clean face," Jody teased. "Should I cut his hair too?" Both toddlers eagerly said, "Yes." I laughed and said, "I'll let the barber handle that on Monday." "No, I'll do it myself before you change your mind," Jody insisted. After drying off the kids and getting them dressed for bed, they sat at the kitchen table and watched Jody cut my hair. By the time she finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I told Jody she did a great job. She sent me to shower off the loose hair while she cleaned up. During this, her grandmother called to say Connie had just left. Jody believed her grandmother was ready to confront the family, straightening things out. Connie learned that my 3 children were supposed to receive $600 each per month from annuities I had set up for child support, but they hadn't received any of it. The next week, I endured jokes from everyone about my new look. People asked Jody if she had to blackmail me into joining normal society. Jody humorously replied that I had promised to bathe at least 3 times a week. Most got the joke, some didn't. It was interesting to see how people acted when they believed they were superior. Bird of Paradise informed me that I would be sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Jody and I found this amusing, thinking a judgment would lead to a collection service trying to find me. When the mailman broke the news, he also found it funny. His boss and the DA hired an attorney to represent me, using my situation to piece things together. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had stolen over $48,000 from each of our children. They re-examined my former attorney's sudden pass away, turning it into an open criminal case. Jody's ex-husband became a person of interest. If the findings were true, Willa and Tammy faced 7 to 10 years in prison, and Willa's former attorney, now her common-law husband, could be disbarred. The lawyer they hired for me would be paid by them, and I needed to stay hidden to help build a stronger case. We had a few weeks of peace. Then Josie called Sunday night, informing us that paperwork would be filed on Monday. She emailed me everything she had collected over 7 years, including notarized statements, videotaped conversations, and names of attorneys for a countersuit. A $2 million accident insurance policy caught my eye, explaining some missing money. Jody found out it had been purchased 6 months before I left. We spent half the night forwarding information to the DA, certain this was a setup to lure me back. The next morning, Jody called the recommended attorneys and picked one, sending them everything along with a retainer. As soon as Willa's team filed the lawsuit, I would serve them before receiving it. On Friday morning, Jody called me. Josie was on her way with guests, having left Thursday night and stayed overnight at a hotel. This indicated things were heating up. Jody and I decided to close the store on Saturday and have a long weekend with family. Peter was riding with Connie and their son. All Connie knew was that they were visiting Jody. Around 7 p.m., we saw a Ford Explorer and Escape pull up in the driveway. 4 adults got out of the cars. Jody noticed my concern and took my hand. My truck was hidden in the garage, so no one knew I was there. "Who's that with Josie?" Jody asked. "That's Peter, his wife Connie holding their baby, and Karen, my second oldest," I replied. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. Jody, holding our youngest, opened the front door. We all came out to greet our guests. Karen burst into tears upon seeing me. I handed my son to his great-grandmother and hugged Karen tightly. Connie handed her son to Peter and joined us. My daughters had grown into lovely ladies, and seeing them together was unforgettable. "Good to see you again, Peter," I said, shaking his hand. After introductions, Jody served a huge dinner. Beef shoulder, mashed potatoes, gravy, scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and hot apple pie for dessert. After the kids settled, we started discussing everything. "First of all, Art, is it okay if I call you Dad?" Peter asked. I nodded. "Then, Dad, the DA believes Jody's ex's car was involved in your lawyer's accident. We're doing a paint comparison with the current owner's car. If it matches, he'll be charged with manslaughter," Peter explained. "The fire that destroyed his office the same night was treated as arson. He was seen in the background on video. Since Willa and her attorney sealed the divorce papers, they think there are no documents to prove what happened. They filed a lawsuit against you this week." Jody looked at me and burst into tears. "I always thought you were overprotective when you moved me here, but now I see you weren't. I thought your questions to my grandmother were excessive, but now I realize you needed to understand who we were dealing with before making a plan." Willa and Tammy received your lawsuit on Thursday, Josie said. They must have realized I was communicating with you. We feared they'd start tormenting me, so we came here quickly. Grandma, we got your house ready, Jody said. It's furnished, so you just need clothes. I brought most of it in the car, Josie said. Connie will ship the rest, including antiques. I gave her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It was time to leave paradise. I'll drive back with Peter and Connie and rent a truck to haul everything out, I said. It's time to see if our suspicions are correct. What suspicions? Asked Peter. The lawsuit against me is a ploy to lure me out, I said. With $2 million in accidental pass-away insurance, it's clear my former attorney's pass-away was a test. Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie's faces turned white as they realized the truth. They were planning your pass-away, Dad, Connie said. You knew it before you left town. I had a good idea at the time, but even my lawyer didn't believe me, I replied with a broad smile. He experienced firsthand that I was right. Peter excused himself to make important calls. This gave my daughters, my wife, and me time to catch up. Jody found pictures of me from when we first met. Both daughters admitted they wouldn't have recognized me. When Peter returned, everyone fell silent. Willa will be taken into custody after the holiday, Peter said. We can hold her for 48 hours before charging her with 3 counts of theft for stealing annuities from her children. We'll slow down the process so she won't get a bond hearing immediately, Peter explained. Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul and visit some old places to get noticed. Tell anyone who asks that you're here to pack Josie's things. This way, Willa will have to communicate from jail. The district attorney confirmed your suspicions were right. We'll have police protection for you at Josie's house until everything is resolved. Peter, are you using my children's father as bait to lure out my cousins? Jody asked. What assurance do I have that he won't become a sufferer? I looked at Jody, and she saw my determination. Damn, you'll do it without hesitation, no matter what I think, she said. Jody knew me better than I knew myself. Jody, Art has always been like that. That's why I called him to save you from your ex, Josie said. Art never asks anyone to do what he wouldn't do himself. He wants to rid us of those witches for good. My only fear is Art going back into danger, Jody replied, smiling. If Art were a boxer, he'd be a world title holder, Josie said. He's fast on his feet and can outthink them. Willa and Tammy have no idea he knows anything. Ladies, relax. I'll be in Peter's hands, I said. If anything happens to me, remember he'll have to answer to Connie, my daughter. Peter just nodded, knowing the risks of my return to paradise. Later, while the women were deep in conversation, Peter and I talked. The DA thinks Jody's ex will make his move once he knows you're in town. He'll be furious knowing you rescued Jody from her terrible marriage, Peter said. Willa will learn you're here from a planted informant in the city jail early Thursday morning. If he's caught in the act, will he spill everything to save himself? I asked. Based on his military background, he's always admitted responsibility when caught. He's a follower, not a leader, so I expect him to give up easily. He sticks with Willa and Tammy because he's easily manipulated, Peter replied. The sign read, Welcome to City of Refuge. Population 34,823. It confirmed that the city council had declared the laws of the United States didn't apply here. It was like the Wild West, with justice depending on what the local authorities decided. Law-abiding citizens were prosecuted, while illegals were ignored, reflecting a skewed version of progressivism. The working class paid for the sins of others to please those in power who wanted lower wages and cheaper labor. Many actions were taken to provide that opportunity, requiring those in power to look the other way. Not much had changed here in almost 7 years. Aside from the freshly paved main street, everything looked the same. I decided my first stop should be my old favorite place, if it still existed. Thankfully, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar was still around, looking the same but freshly painted. I pulled into the parking lot, got out of the U-Haul truck, and headed for the main entrance at 11:15, just before the weekday lunch crowd. I was counting on being recognized since I was a businessman in a former life. We wanted everyone to know I was back. As I took a seat and picked up my menu, I noticed several people looking at me and using their cell phones. A server brought my coffee and creamer and asked if I was ready to order. Is Wednesday's special of meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes available? I asked. How do you know about that? The server inquired. It's for regular customers and not advertised. Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and fried onions with the meatloaf, I said. The waitress looked at me like I was crazy. I stood up and said, "Never mind, I'll tell him myself." I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen, with the server following and shouting my order. Jack turned and looked at me. "You dumbass," Jack said with a smirk. "You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend. Susan, bring Art's coffee over here so we can catch up while he eats." Jack, the son of the original owner, never changed the name. We'd been friends most of our lives. We chatted until just before rush hour. He asked a staff member to get his wife to join us, giving us a chance to talk about important things. "Art, you should know that after you left, the wife ended her friendship with Willa and Tammy for good. She didn't like what they did or said about you and the kids. Jack, a few things are about to happen. Last night, there was supposed to be an arrest that, if things go right, will trigger several events like a row of dominoes," I explained. "Connie's husband, Peter, works with me. That's why I came back early." Jack looked at me seriously and said, "He's a damn good cop and an honest man. He put 2 of our former city council members in jail last year for corruption. You'll have to tell me more later. There are too many big ears here." We saw Sasha pull into the parking lot. She looked good. I sat down and waited for her to come in, knowing she'd see me from behind and not suspect anything was wrong. "Jack, what happened?" Susan asked. "It was important," Sasha said. When she saw me, I stood up and turned to her. Sasha, my little sister, had lost her temper. Her older, meaner brother was home. I hugged her tightly like it was just yesterday. It took her a few minutes to calm down. Jack asked the kitchen staff to leave us alone for a few minutes. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sasha asked. "No, and it's best if we keep it a secret for a few days," I replied. "Are you here because Willa was taken into custody last night?" my sister asked. "Yes, and it's going to get worse before it gets better," I said. "Once I settle in, I'll be under police protection. The police are now looking at my former lawyer's pass away with new eyes, believing it's connected to the arson attack on his office." Jack and Sasha's expressions spoke for themselves. It was well known that the district attorney, appointed 3 years ago, was trying to resolve many unsolved cases. "You're a decoy to draw someone out," Jack said quietly. "If this is correct, the arson, liquidation, and several other crimes will be solved in the next few days," I replied. "This was all done to force me back to the city. Willa's arrest and my sudden return will disrupt a carefully planned conspiracy." "What's behind all this?" Jack asked. "A $2 million insurance policy with double indemnity on accidental pass away," I said. "Insured on me." My sister said, as we walked out of the restaurant to my rental truck. We were chatting when we noticed Tammy pulling up beside us. "Where are you staying?" my sister whispered. "At the Grand Dame's house. I'll be moving her stuff to the new house," I said. She wanted to be away from whatever was about to happen. Josie left town. "Why?" Sasha asked. "She wants to be near her granddaughter and our 2 sons," I answered with a smile. "Jody and I have been together for over 5 years. We have 2 boys who recently turned 3 and 4. My sister was in complete shock. "How did you and Jody end up together?" "Josie and I stayed in touch the whole time," I explained. "When Jody needed help leaving a failed marriage, her grandmother called me. I moved her to my place. We believe her ex caused my lawyer's pass away and the fire at his office." "Do Tammy and Willa know you're aware of what's happening?" asked Sasha. "No, but they'll find out soon enough when they start making their moves," I replied as Tammy approached us. "Art, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us," Tammy said. "The district attorney will charge Willa within 48 hours. Unfortunately, my attorney says we can't do that because Willa filed a new divorce petition claiming desertion, abandonment of the child, and back child support," I said. "Until the court rules on her claims, everything has to stay as it is." "You can't say that. How will we bail her out with no assets?" Tammy asked. "You have a court order freezing everything?" "Maybe your father could help by putting up his house as collateral," I suggested. "After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy turned and walked away, disappointed. "Willa and Tammy's father has nothing to do with them," Sasha said. "Not since he found out about Seth's true origins. He says they turned out just as bad as their mother." That brought a smile to my face. Finished with that, I got in the U-Haul and drove toward Josie's house, stopping to pick up packing materials. 3 hours later, I was backing into Josie's driveway. Using the large mirror, I parked close to the garage door. Once outside, I locked up before entering the house. I checked to make sure nothing had been touched inside. Josie said she left the curtains open, but they were closed. I texted Peter to ask if he had closed them. He replied that police officers in the house might have done it. Knowing this, I unlocked the front door and went inside. "Mr. Racine," the officer said, holding out a cell phone. "Peter Edwards wants to speak with you." "Hi, Peter," I said. "Looks like those who need to know." "No. Tammy talked to me at the burger place after I finished my long lunch. She wanted me to lift the lien on her sister's assets, and I refused." "I heard that," Peter said. "We taped Willa and Tammy discussing their plans. Jody's ex, Brad Press, came up a lot. Willa told Tammy to let him know that you know where Jody is. That should motivate him to do what we need. Our hunch was right because Brad showed up not an hour later. Willa told him where you were staying. Our informant, who was arrested today, told her you were back to move Josie," Peter said. When Brad asked where, Willa said to her granddaughter, Jody's house. A few minutes later, I saw the garage door open. Climbing into the van, I pulled out bundles of cardboard boxes and started packing up the house. At 6:30 p.m., the pizza from Papa John's arrived. When the delivery driver knocked, I opened the door. He asked if I was moving. I said no, just helping a friend. Brad made his move around 11 p.m. Using a tire iron, he picked the front door lock and slipped inside. Seeing a light in the kitchen, he headed there, pulling a 9mm pistol from under his shirt. He found me sitting there drinking coffee. "Hey, Art," Brad said. "Willa and Tammy say hi. I'm here to find out where Jody is so I can visit her." "Sorry, but I'd never tell my lawyer's eliminator or the man who burned his office," I replied. "Before you eliminate me, because we both know you will, how much were you promised from the insurance settlement?" "What makes you think I did it?" he asked, taking the bait. "Because you seem like someone they could manipulate into doing their dirty work. So how much of the $4 million on the accidental pass-away policy did they promise you?" $4 million? They told me it was only $750,000, he said. I laughed and said, "Did you know Seth is actually the son of Tammy's first husband?" His face turned white. "George and I have been manipulated and used by both twins for years. My attorney, working on my divorce, sued George and Tammy for everything they had." Brad's face went white. "That's why I knew Willa suing me for desertion and back child support was a scam," I said. "The divorce was finalized and just needed her signature. She manipulated me into coming back. That's when I put it all together. You're just another pawn they played. So ask yourself, what are their plans for you? My divorce only delayed their plan to eliminate me. You eliminating my lawyer put their original plan back in motion. You have a chance to set them back for years knowing them as we do. What does your gut tell you? It's hard to watch a fool realize he's expendable once he's no longer needed." "I'm screwed either way," Brad said. "The fact that your lawyer lost control of his car and hit a tree at 70 miles an hour is manslaughter. Manslaughter would get me life. You could get 5 to 10 for manslaughter, but liquidation is life. When I'm dead, they can claim you acted out of rage over Jody and didn't know what you were doing. Did they set you up to be a scapegoat? Most accidental pass-away policies don't cover liquidation. If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" asked Brad. "You'd make a deal, turn in state's evidence, and hope your cooperation is taken into account. That way you'd get revenge on those planning to take you out," I said. Brad put the weapon on the table and said, "Call the police." I said, "Brad, turn around. They're standing right behind you." Connie watched her husband on the phone, wondering what was wrong. Peter had told her that her father was at Josie's. A late call on his cell phone woke them both up. While he was talking, she put the kettle on to make hot chocolate for them. When Peter hung up the phone, he was smiling. "Your father surprised us all tonight." He talked Brad out of it and basically forced him to confess everything. The undercover cops videotaped the whole thing. Connie froze with surprise. "How did my father do that?" "He told Brad some facts he didn't know, like the truth about Seth's origins," Peter said. "I think your father convinced Brad that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out for liquidation. That was the deciding factor. Even I don't know if that's true, but it created enough doubt for Brad to accept the consequences of a lesser offense instead of life without parole. Aunt Josie always said your dad was a quick thinker, but this was unexpected." "What does this mean for my mom and sister?" asked Connie. "If Brad agrees to testify against them in court, they'll both be charged with arson, manslaughter, and at least attempted liquidation of your father," said Peter. Connie picked up her cell phone and called Jody to let her know. They made a plan. Josie would watch the kids for a few days because Jody was going to the airport. Connie would meet her when she got a text with her arrival time. After finishing the call, she explained everything to her sister. By then, Peter had dressed and was heading to the station to get Brad's signed statement before the night ended. I didn't wake up until 8 in the morning. The first thing I did was call Jack to get the front door fixed. He said he knew someone, and within half an hour they were there. The door was replaced, new trim and lock installed. The gentleman was just finishing when my daughter Connie drove up with Jody. Jody jumped out of the car and ran to me, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, I realized how much she had been through. Brad was taken into custody last night, I said. He surrendered to the police protecting me. I was never in any real danger. If that was the case, why didn't you call me? Jody said. Why did I have to hear about it from Connie? It was almost 2 a.m. when the police cleared out, I answered honestly. I figured I'd call you today. I put my arm around my wife and pulled her close. I promise I will never put myself in that kind of danger again. As soon as the repairman finished, we locked the car, put her luggage away, and went to my brother's restaurant to eat. There, we were met by Karen, Sasha, and my parents. Jack's staff had to move 2 tables so we could all sit together. Jody was warmly greeted by everyone. Our breakfast, when it arrived, was excellent. Jack was so excited about what had happened that we ate it all. My parents were thrilled to learn that Jody and I had 2 sons named Carson and Hunter, after both my grandfathers. They looked through all the pictures of our children and us that Jody had saved on her cell phone. My daughters opened up and told them about discovering me with Josie. We were still there when Peter joined us. I noticed he looked tired. Willa and Tammy are in custody now, Peter said. Brad has confessed to everything, including his initial plan to eliminate his father. He'll be charged with arson and manslaughter when he testifies in the witch trials. Tammy and Willa face 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit liquidation, and fraud. The district attorney is meeting with the divorce judge who handled your father's case to expedite the finalization of your divorce. Peter, are you saying that Art and I can finally get married? Asked Jody, trying to process what she had heard. The DA took the papers to the judge, Peter explained, along with Dad's original divorce papers. He hopes the judge, being fully informed, will waive Willa's signature requirement, the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate. Jody, I said, I think I'd better buy you a proper engagement ring today and finally propose. Everyone murmured at my remark. Tears welled up in Jody's eyes. She had always believed we would do it, but this was something she hadn't expected. Before we left, Mom and Dad made us promise to come over for dinner. Jody and I busied ourselves packing until about 5:30. Then we headed to my parents' house for dinner. Mom and Dad had a lot of questions. Jody shared how I had saved her from a failed marriage, thanks to her grandmother. Then she talked about getting her first job and where it led. We were still enjoying their company when Peter and Connie arrived with my divorce certificate. It was good to know that I was now free. When Jody had a chance to talk, she bragged about our children and our life together. My mom said, "We should have a wedding before you both get back." That's when my father got Peter's attention, grabbing a glass of fresh beer each. We followed him to the den because we couldn't get a word in edgewise. When word got out that Tammy had been arrested, people started calling with more information. Half of the DA's staff had to help us. Turns out what we knew was just scratching the surface of what Tammy and Willa were up to. Now it looks like the mayor will go down with them. And what's going to happen to Willa's common-law husband? I asked out of curiosity. How involved was he in all of this? He'll probably be disbarred, but he'll be involved in raising their children. Nothing we've found links him to the witches, Peter said. Has anyone notified Aunt Josie? Connie asked. Jody's dad wears a size 6.5 ring, in case you were wondering. A few minutes later, Peter and I were on our way to the mall, where he bought Connie a set of Knowing Jody's Taste, and I bought a 3-ring engagement set. When we returned, we were pleased to find that they didn't know we had left. I was on the phone with Josie when Karen and her boyfriend showed up. The house was full, and we all moved into the living room. The men had to bring chairs from the kitchen. Dad told Jody to sit in his chair. This let my mom know something was up, so she watched the scene with eagle eyes. There was silence in the room as I walked over and knelt down to ask my common-law spouse to legally become my wife. I caught her off guard, of course. She said yes. The party went on. My father proudly said, "I need to catch up on almost 7 years of drinking with my son and Jody. And Art, your engagement is the best way to start." Peter had to drive Jody and me back to Josie's. A lot of stress and worry were relieved. Friday, we went to City Hall to pick up our license. Jody found out she could fit into Connie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man. Karen became Jody's maid of honor. The DA agreed to perform the ceremony. I had to buy a suit at Macy's. There was no way my future wife was going to let me marry her in blue jeans. On Sunday afternoon, in my parents' backyard, with the entire family present, we said our vows to everyone's admiration. Even the twins' father was there. We told everyone we didn't want any gifts, but my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. "Colin, this is not a wedding gift. It's your early inheritance," he said with a smile. "The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." I slipped the envelope into my suit and forgot about it for the rest of the day. Everyone videotaped the ceremony and texted it to Aunt Josie. Someone asked where we were going on our honeymoon. Jody's response was, "After everything we've been through, once Grandma gets settled in the new house, our honeymoon will be a week in Florida and a week in California, enjoying Disney with the kids. Because without family, we wouldn't be where we are today." Before we headed home the next day, I handed Jody an envelope. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000 with a note. It read, "Thank you for helping to fix karma. I always thought the twins liquidated their mother. I will enjoy watching them get the reward they deserve for their deeds, and so will my granddaughters." Jody put the envelope in her purse without saying anything to anyone. After hugging my daughters and parents, Jody and I climbed into the U-Haul. We drove home, finally free of the past.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ted Kinney's meticulously maintained backyard. He stood on his wraparound deck, hands gripping the polished mahogany railing, watching a small army of caterers transform the space into an elegant venue. White-clothed tables dotted the lawn like oversized mushrooms, while strings of crystal lights were being hung between the mature oak trees that bordered his property. "Table 4 needs to be 3 feet to the left," Ted called out, gesturing to a pair of caterers struggling with a particularly heavy table. "We need clear paths between all the seating areas." At 52, Ted carried himself with the confidence of a self-made man. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his custom-tailored suit fit his athletic frame perfectly. He unconsciously adjusted the new Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, Madeline's latest gift. The timepiece probably cost more than his first construction truck, but that was the kind of life they lived now. Still micromanaging every detail. "I see." A familiar voice called from behind him. Ted turned to see Carol Lancaster, his best friend and business partner of 15 years, approaching with 2 crystal tumblers of scotch. Carol's tie was already slightly loosened, his jacket draped over one arm, a stark contrast to Ted's impeccable appearance. "Someone has to make sure it's done right." Ted accepted the offered drink, taking a small sip. "Macallan 25? Only the best for your 20th, Carol replied, leaning against the railing. "Quite the turnout expected tonight?" Madeline insisted, Ted said, watching another catering van pull into the circular driveway. "Seems half of Boston's elite will be here." The guest list reads like a who's who of New England society. Carol shifted uncomfortably, his expression turning serious. "Ted, there's something you should know about that European investor who's been hanging around the office lately. I've been doing some digging and—" "Darling." Madeline's voice rang out from the French doors leading to the house. She glided onto the deck, a vision in a champagne-colored Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 48, she still turned heads, her blonde hair styled in elegant waves, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. Behind her strode a tall, distinguished-looking man with olive skin and salt and pepper hair. His Italian suit screamed old money, and his smile carried the confident charm of European aristocracy. "Phil arrived early," Madeline announced, touching Ted's arm with perfectly manicured fingers. "You remember Phil Melendez, the art dealer from Barcelona? He's been so helpful with furnishing the new office building." Phil stepped forward, extending his hand. "Ted, wonderful to see you again. The property is looking magnificent." His accent was subtle but unmistakable, adding an air of sophistication to his words. Ted shook the offered hand, noting how familiar Phil seemed with his surroundings. "Glad you could make it, Phil. I trust your flight was comfortable?" "But of course." Your lovely wife arranged everything perfectly. Phil's eyes lingered on Madeline for a fraction too long. She has impeccable taste. Before Ted could respond, excited voices called from the lawn. Uncle Phil, Lance and Jeannie, the twins, bounded up the deck stairs. At 16, they were the perfect blend of their parents, or so Ted had always thought. Lance had his father's build and his mother's fair coloring, while Jeannie was a younger version of Madeline with what Ted had assumed was his own dark eyes. Ah, Ms. Niños. Phil's face lit up as he embraced the teenagers. You've grown so much since Christmas. Ted frowned slightly. Had Phil been at their Christmas celebration? He couldn't recall, but then again, he'd been busy with the Morrison project deadline. Did you bring us anything from Barcelona? Jeannie asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Phil laughed, reaching into his jacket. Would I ever forget? He produced 2 small wrapped packages. But these are for later, yes? Carol cleared his throat. Ted, about what I was saying. Darling, Madeline interrupted smoothly. The band needs to know where to set up. Would you mind? Ted nodded, downing the last of his scotch. As he walked away, he could hear Phil asking the twins about their studies, speaking with the familiarity of a close relative rather than a casual business acquaintance. The next hour passed in a blur of logistics and greetings as guests began to arrive. Ted found himself playing the role of gracious host, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and making small talk about business and politics. Yet he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. From across the rapidly filling backyard, he caught sight of Kimberly Orr, his secretary of 12 years. She was standing near the bar, her expression troubled as she watched him. She'd been trying to speak with him privately for weeks now, but something always seemed to come up. Usually Madeline needing his attention for some urgent matter. Mr. Kinney? Kimberly started making her way toward him, but Madeline suddenly appeared at his side. Ted, the Hendersons just arrived. You must come say hello. Richard is considering investing in that new development project. As his wife led him away, Ted glanced back to see Kimberly's shoulders slump in resignation. The party was in full swing as the sun began to set. Hundreds of tiny lights twinkled in the trees, casting a warm glow over the gathering. A jazz quartet played sophisticated background music while waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Ted stood near the bar, observing the scene with a businessman's eye for detail. The catering was impeccable, the music perfectly pitched to enable conversation, the lighting creating an intimate atmosphere despite the large crowd. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect. His gaze drifted to where Phil Melendez held court near the pool, surrounded by admiring guests. The art dealer was regaling them with what appeared to be an amusing story, his hands gesturing expressively. Madeline stood at his elbow, laughing at all the right moments, her hand occasionally brushing his arm. They seemed quite comfortable together, Carol murmured, appearing at Ted's side with fresh drinks. Ted accepted the scotch without taking his eyes off the scene. Phil's been around a lot this past year. Potential investments in the company, art consulting for the new buildings, cultural advice for our European expansion. About that, Carol began, lowering his voice. I've been looking into his background, and something doesn't add up. His investment firm? Dad. Lance's voice cut through their conversation as he approached with a group of his friends. Uncle Phil was just telling us about his villa in Barcelona. He says we should come stay for the summer. Ted's brow furrowed. Uncle Phil? Lance's expression flickered for a moment before he recovered. Oh, that's just what we call him. He's around so much. It just feels natural. How long has he been around so much? Ted asked carefully. Oh, Lance shifted uncomfortably. Hey, is it okay if we use the pool house to change? Some of us want to swim. Before Ted could respond, Phil appeared behind Lance, resting a familiar hand on the boy's shoulder. Perhaps swimming isn't the best idea, Mijo. The night air is getting chilly, and we wouldn't want you catching cold before your big tennis match tomorrow. Ted stared at Phil. How did he know about Lance's tennis schedule? Uncle Phil's right. Lance agreed easily. Come on, guys, let's grab some food instead. As the teenagers moved away, Phil gave Ted a practice smile. Wonderful boys you have, Ted. They remind me so much of myself at that age. The same spirit, the same fire in their eyes. Ted forced himself to return the smile, even as something cold settled in his stomach. They're good kids. Take after their mother mostly. Ah, yes. Phil's eyes drifted to where Madeline was chatting with some guests. Madeline is exceptional. You're a lucky man, Ted. Before Ted could respond, Kimberly approached again, clutching her phone. Mr. Kinney, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something urgent I need to discuss. Ted. Madeline's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. The Blakelines want to discuss that charity gala they're planning. Come, darling, you simply must hear their ideas. As Ted was led away once again, he noticed Phil and Kimberly exchange a look, his smugly confident, hers filled with frustrated concern. The night wore on, and Ted found himself watching his family with new eyes. He noticed how Jeannie gravitated toward Phil, showing him her recent school photos on her phone. The art dealer's comments suggested an intimate knowledge of her life, her horseback riding lessons, her struggles with calculus, her dreams of studying in Europe. Photo time, Madeline called out, gathering the family near the garden trellis. Phil, dear, would you mind taking it? Actually, one of the guests offered. I can take it so Phil can be in the photo too. Ted watched as his family arranged themselves, with Phil somehow ending up between the twins, his arms around their shoulders as naturally as if he belonged there. The flash went off, capturing a moment that felt increasingly surreal. Oh, that's lovely, Madeline gushed, reviewing the photo. Phil, you must send this to Isabel. She'll love seeing how much the twins have grown. Isabel? Ted asked. My sister in Barcelona, Phil explained smoothly. She's quite fond of your family. Ted's mind raced. When had his family met Phil's sister? How had he missed these connections forming right under his nose? From across the garden, he caught sight of Carol deep in conversation with Kimberly, both of them throwing concerned glances his way. Whatever they were trying to tell him, he had a sinking feeling it was too late. As the party began to wind down, Ted found himself seeking solitude in his garden. The space had been Madeline's project when they first bought the house, but she'd lost interest once it was completed, leaving the maintenance to their gardeners. Now, it served as a quiet retreat from the dwindling celebration. He walked along the winding path, past carefully tended roses and ornamental shrubs, until he reached the Victorian-style trellis arch covered in climbing vines. The structure marked the entrance to a small meditation area, complete with a stone bench and a quietly burbling fountain. Voices drifted from the other side of the trellis, partially obscured by the sound of water. Ted recognized his children's voices and started to step forward to greet them, but something in their tone made him pause. Dad's so stupid and dumb. Lance's voice carried clearly through the evening air, followed by a laugh that made Ted's blood run cold. It wasn't the typical teenage dismissal of a parent. There was real contempt in his son's voice. I know, right? Jeannie joined in. He doesn't know you're our real father. Ted's hand gripped the trellis, his knuckles turning white. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as a third voice joined the conversation. Now, Ms. Niños. Phil's accent was thicker in this unguarded moment. We must be patient. Everything is arranged. But it's been forever, Jeannie whined. Mom says once the inheritance comes through, we'll all move to your house in Europe. She's already packed most of her jewelry. Your mother is enthusiastic, Phil chuckled. But these things take time. The accounts must be properly prepared. The paperwork must be perfect. One small mistake could ruin everything. I don't see why we have to wait, Lance grumbled. It's not like he suspects anything. He's too busy with his precious company to notice what's happening in his own house. That's exactly why we must be careful. Phil's voice took on a warning tone. Ted. He may be blind to his personal life, but he's no fool when it comes to business. One wrong move could cost us everything. Mom says he signed those new contracts last week, Jeannie offered. The ones about the European expansion? Yes, and those will prove very useful, Phil replied. But there are still details to arrange. The offshore accounts need time to mature. The property transfers must appear natural. What about the company? Lance asked. Mom said something about a takeover? Leave that to the adults, Mijo. Roger Clements is handling that part of the arrangement. Soon enough, everything will belong to us, as it should have from the beginning. Ted stood frozen behind the trellis, his mind racing to process what he was hearing. 17 years of marriage, 16 years of fatherhood, all built on a foundation of lies. Every business deal, every family dinner, every moment of what he'd thought was happiness. It had all been part of an elaborate deception. I still can't believe he bought that story about the art dealership, Lance snickered. As if anyone would pay those prices for those ugly modern pieces. Your father, Phil caught himself, Ted, sees what he expects to see. It's a common weakness in men who build themselves up from nothing. They become so focused on proving themselves that they miss what's right in front of them. Like Mom's business trips to Barcelona? Jeannie giggled. Or all those art consultation meetings at the hotel downtown, Lance added. Phil's voice turned sharp. Enough. Your mother and I have protected you from the uglier aspects of this situation, but never forget what's at stake. One careless word, one misplaced comment, and everything we've worked for could disappear. Sorry, Papa. The twins chorused, the words striking Ted like a physical blow. Now, go back to the party, Phil instructed. Your mother will be looking for you. Remember, just a few more months, and we'll never have to pretend again. Ted heard footsteps on the garden path as his children. No, Phil's children, walked away, still giggling about their deception. He remained hidden until Phil's footsteps followed, moving in the opposite direction. When he was finally alone, Ted sank onto the stone bench, his legs no longer able to support him. The fountain bubbled cheerfully beside him, its sound now seeming to mock the destruction of his world. Everything made sense now. The interrupted conversations with Carol and Kimberly, Madeline's sudden interest in the European expansion projects, the twins' increasing distance from him. All the pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of betrayal so complete it took his breath away. He pulled out his phone, looking at the family photo from earlier that evening. They were all smiling at the camera, a perfect family portrait. But now he could see what he'd been missing. The way Madeline leaned slightly toward Phil, the natural way the twins fit under his arms, the subtle signs of conspiracy in their expressions. A message notification popped up on his screen, Kimberly trying one last time to warn him. Below it was an email from Roger Clements, his supposed colleague, probably containing another piece of the trap they were laying for him. Ted stood slowly, slipping his phone back into his pocket. The garden path stretched before him, leading back to the party where his wife, his children, and the man who had stolen them continued to play their roles in this elaborate charade. The quiet rage building inside him was tempered by years of business experience. He'd built his empire from nothing once before. He could do it again, but this time, he'd make sure those who betrayed him lost everything in the process. As he emerged from the garden, Ted's face showed nothing of his inner turmoil. He joined a group of guests, laughing at their jokes and discussing business prospects as if his entire world hadn't just crumbled around him. After all, he had learned something valuable tonight. Sometimes the perfect lie wasn't the one you told others, but the one you told yourself. Across the yard, he caught Carol's eye and gave a slight nod. Whatever his friend and Kimberly had been trying to tell him, he already knew the worst of it. Now it was time to plan his countermove, and Ted Kinney hadn't become successful by playing defense. The party continued around him, crystal glasses clinking, music playing, and conversations flowing. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath the perfect facade, the first cracks had appeared, and Ted knew that when the breaking finally came, it would shatter everything in its path. The morning after his 20th wedding anniversary party, Ted Kinney sat in his home office, staring at the family portrait on his desk. The first rays of sunrise filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. He hadn't slept. How could he, after what he'd discovered? The sound of Madeline's soft breathing drifted from their bedroom down the hall. She had no idea he'd spent the night reviewing old photos, financial statements, and correspondence, seeing them all with new eyes. His phone buzzed. Carol. I'm coming over, his friend said without preamble. And I'm bringing someone you need to meet. 30 minutes later, Carol arrived with a man who looked more like an accountant than a private investigator. Average height, average build, unremarkable features. The kind of person your eyes would slide right past in a crowd. Ted Kinney, meet Darren Brown, Carol made the introduction in Ted's study. He's the best in the business at uncovering things people want to keep hidden. Darren set his briefcase on Ted's desk. Mr. Lancaster has filled me in on the situation. Before we proceed, I need to know. Are you absolutely certain you want to know everything? Some truths can't be unknown once they're revealed. Ted's laugh was hollow. I heard my children call another man Papa last night. I think we're past the point of protecting my feelings. Fair enough. Darren opened his briefcase. I've already done preliminary research based on Mr. Lancaster's concerns. Your wife's travel patterns over the past 17 years show regular trips to Barcelona, often coinciding with school holidays or business conferences you couldn't attend. 17 years, Ted muttered. The twins are 16. Yes, Darren nodded. And there's more. Your children's last physical examination included routine blood work. With the right access, those samples could be repurposed for DNA testing. Carol leaned forward. Is that legal? Let's say it falls into a gray area, Darren replied. The question is, do you want to know? Ted stood, walking to his window. Below, he could see the remains of last night's party being cleared away. A catering truck was pulling out of the driveway, and gardeners were collecting the strings of lights from the trees. Do it, he said without turning around. I want proof of everything, the affairs, the business dealings, all of it. Leave no stone unturned. It will take time, Darren cautioned, and it won't be cheap. Money is no object. Ted finally turned back to face them. But time might be. Based on what I overheard last night, they're planning something big. I'll need access to your home and office computers, Darren said, pulling out a small device. This will mirror their hard drives without leaving a trace. And I'll need your authorization to place surveillance. A knock at the study door interrupted him. Ted quickly signaled Darren to pack away his equipment. Come in, he called, keeping his voice casual. Madeline entered, still in her silk robe, looking fresh despite the early hour. Darling, I thought I heard voices. Carol, what brings you here so early? And who's this? Dave Brown, Darren answered smoothly, extending his hand. I'm with the Contractors Association. We were just discussing the new European development project. Of course, Madeline's smile was perfect, practiced. Would anyone like coffee? I can have Rosa bring some up. No need, Carol stood. We were just leaving. Ted, we'll continue this discussion at the office. After they left, Madeline wrapped her arms around Ted from behind. You worked so hard on the party, darling. You should have slept in. Ted forced himself to return her embrace, remembering the jewelry she'd already packed, the plans she'd already made. You know me. Always working. Speaking of work, she pulled back slightly. Phil mentioned he might stop by the office today. Something about those investment papers? Did he? Ted kept his voice neutral. I'll make sure Kimberly knows to expect him. Oh, don't bother Kimberly with it. I can handle all the arrangements. Of course you can, Ted thought. The next few weeks passed in a blur of secret meetings and revelations. Darren's reports arrived daily, each one worse than the last. Email exchanges between Madeline and Phil spanning nearly 2 decades. Offshore account transfers disguised as art purchases. Meeting records with Roger Clements, Ted's biggest competitor, outlining plans for a hostile takeover. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning. Ted stared at the numbers and charts that proved what he'd already known in his heart. The twins were not his children. He was reviewing the latest batch of documents in his office when Kimberly finally managed to corner him alone. She closed the door behind her, her usual professional demeanor cracking with urgency. Mr. Kinney, I've been trying to tell you. Mrs. Kinney has been copying company documents. She's been meeting with Roger Clements from our rival firm. Ted looked up at his loyal secretary. How many times had she tried to warn him? How many signals had he missed? I know, Kimberly. He smiled grimly. And I know about the planned hostile takeover too. Kimberly sank into the chair across from his desk. How long have you known? Since the anniversary party. Ted passed her one of Darren's reports. They're planning to strip the company assets, transfer everything to offshore accounts, and leave me with nothing but debt and federal investigations. Those bastards, Kimberly whispered, scanning the documents. What are you going to do? What I do best, Ted replied. Build something new from the ground up. But first, I'm going to need your help. The law office of Jerry Shannon and Associates occupied the entire top floor of a downtown Boston high-rise. Ted sat in the conference room with Jerry Shannon and Carrie Douglas, his financial advisor, surrounded by stacks of documents and empty coffee cups. They'd been working through the night, methodically dismantling and rebuilding Ted's empire. The company shares will be transferred to a new holding corporation, Jerry explained, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. Your personal assets will be moved to unreachable trusts. They won't get a dime. Carrie nodded, pulling up complex spreadsheets on her tablet. I've arranged for the sale of your European properties. They'll close the day you leave. The timing has to be perfect. We can't tip our hand too early. What about the twins' trust funds? Ted asked, his voice tight. Already dissolved, Carrie replied softly. The money has been transferred to educational trusts for your employees' children. Legally, it's untouchable. Ted stood, walking to the window. Below, Boston's financial district was coming to life. Early morning workers hurrying through the streets like ants. Ted, Jerry's voice was gentle. Are you sure about this? These moves, they're permanent. Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. They made their choice 17 years ago, Ted replied without turning around. Now I'm making mine. There's something else you should see, Carrie said, pulling out another file. We've been tracking Phil Melendez's art dealings. They're not just a cover for his relationship with Madeline. They're part of an international money laundering operation. If this gets out— When? Ted corrected her. When this gets out. But not yet. First, we need to make sure everything's in place. The next few weeks required Oscar-worthy performances from Ted. He maintained his routine perfectly, playing the role of oblivious husband and businessman. He attended charity functions with Madeline, discussed summer plans with the twins, and reviewed investment proposals with Phil. Late at night, while Madeline slept, he photographed documents from her private files and copied the contents of her laptop. During business hours, he worked closely with Kimberly to document every suspicious transaction, every unauthorized document copy, every secret meeting. Mrs. Kinney called again. Kimberly reported one afternoon. She wants to know if you've reviewed the new contract from Roger Clement's firm. Ted smiled, thinking of the fake contracts Darren had helped him prepare. Tell her I'll look at it tonight. Oh, and Kimberly? Thank you. For everything. Just promise me one thing, Mr. Kinney, she replied. When this all comes down, make sure they get what they deserve. Oh, they will, Ted assured her. They definitely will. The final piece of Ted's plan came together over dinner at an exclusive restaurant in downtown Boston. Isabel Castillo, a legitimate developer from Madrid, sat across from him, reviewing the contracts for what would become the biggest deal of his career. At least, that's what Madeline would be led to believe. Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Kinney, Isabel said in perfect English. Though I must admit, your terms are unusually generous. Call it an investment in the future, Ted replied, signing the contracts with a flourish. And please call me Ted. Later that evening, he presented the deal to Madeline over dinner in their formal dining room. The twins were out with friends, or with Phil, he suspected, leaving them alone in the massive house. It's a 2-year commitment minimum, he explained, watching her reaction carefully. But the profits will set us up for life. Madeline's eyes lit up exactly as he'd expected. The twins could attend school in Europe. I'll start looking at houses. Actually, Ted interrupted, taking a sip of wine to hide his expression, I think you should stay here, manage things. Phil can help with any art acquisitions for the new properties, but surely the children need to finish their education here, Ted said firmly. Besides, someone needs to oversee the company's domestic operations. Who better than you? He watched the calculations play out behind her eyes. 2 years of freedom to operate without his interference. 2 years to complete whatever scheme she and Phil had concocted. Of course, darling, she finally replied, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. You're absolutely right. The children's education should come first. Ted squeezed back, thinking of the documents waiting in Carol's safe. I knew you'd understand. After all, family is everything, isn't it? That night, as Madeline slept beside him, Ted sent a series of encrypted messages from a burner phone. The pieces were all in place. Darren's evidence compiled and verified, Carrie's financial transfers arranged, Jerry's legal documents prepared, and Isabel's role in the deception secured. Soon, very soon, the perfect lie they'd built would come crashing down. But first, Ted had one more role to play. The trusting husband, going off to build a better future for his family. The irony almost made him laugh. Ted sat in Dawn Harper's nondescript office in a quiet suburb of Boston, watching the former intelligence operative type rapidly on multiple screens. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, building his new life piece by digital piece. "Your cryptocurrency accounts are set up," Dawn said, not looking away from her monitors. "I've distributed the funds across multiple wallets using different blockchain networks. Even if they somehow trace one, they'll never find them all." "And the identities?" Ted asked, examining the passports spread before him. Each bore his photo, but with subtle differences: different haircuts, different glasses, different names. Michael Chen, Canadian businessman. James Foster, British consultant. Robert Nash, Australian investor. Dawn pointed to each passport in turn. Each identity has a complete digital footprint going back 15 years. Tax records, credit history, social media presence. Everything needed to withstand scrutiny. Darren Brown, who had recommended Dawn's services, stood by the window keeping watch. "The documents you requested are ready too. Full dossiers on Phil's art fraud operation, Madeline's involvement, the planned hostile takeover, everything." Ted picked up one of the passports, feeling its weight. How long before they realized they're fake? Dawn's laugh was sharp. "Mr. Kinney, these aren't fake. They're real passports, issued by real governments, backed by real documentation. The only fake thing is the name attached to them." A knock at the door made them all tense, but it was just Carol arriving for the final briefing. Ted's friend and business partner looked exhausted. The past few weeks of preparation had taken their toll on everyone. Ted handed him a USB drive. "This contains everything: proof of their affairs, the embezzlement attempts, Phil's criminal record in Europe. Release it to the authorities in exactly 1 month." Carol turned the small device over in his hands, his expression grim. "The company shares? Already transferred to the employees' trust. You're the new CEO." Ted smiled at his friend's surprised look. "Who better to lead them? You helped build this company as much as I did." "The timing has to be perfect," Dawn interrupted, still focused on her screens. "The property sales, the account transfers, the document releases. Everything has to happen in the right sequence." "Walk me through it one more time," Ted requested, needing to be certain every detail was perfect. Dawn pulled up a timeline on her main screen. "At 9 a.m. tomorrow, you leave for your business trip to Spain. At 10 a.m., you actually board a different flight under one of your new identities. By noon, the property sales will close automatically. At 1 p.m., the first round of fund transfers begins. Meanwhile," Darren continued, "Madeline and the twins will be busy packing for their supposed summer trip to Barcelona. They won't notice anything until it's too late. Kimberly has her instructions," Carol added. "She'll execute the final phase of document distribution once I give the signal. SEC, FBI, major news outlets. They'll all receive the evidence simultaneously." Ted stood, walking to the window. Somewhere across the city, his family— no, not his family anymore— was probably having dinner, making plans for a future that would never come. "One last thing," Dawn said, her tone serious. "Once this starts, there's no going back. No contact with anyone from your old life, no matter what. Are you absolutely sure about this?" Ted thought about the twins calling Phil Papa, about Madeline's years of lies, about the planned betrayal that would have left him penniless and alone. "I'm sure," he said quietly. "They made their choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine." The morning of Ted's departure dawned bright and clear. He stood in his bedroom, adjusting his tie one last time, playing the role of businessman preparing for an important trip. "Do you have everything you need?" Madeline asked, helping him with his cufflinks. The ones she'd given him for their 10th anniversary, before the lies had consumed everything. "All set," Ted replied, allowing her to fuss over his appearance. Let her think he was still the same trusting fool. The car will be here in 20 minutes. I've been thinking, she said, smoothing his lapels. Perhaps the twins and I could join you in Spain sooner rather than later. They're so excited about spending summer in Barcelona. I bet they are, Ted thought, remembering the overheard conversation about Phil's house in Europe. Out loud, he said, let's see how the first few weeks go. I want to make sure everything's properly set up. Of course, darling. She kissed his cheek, and Ted marveled at her ability to maintain the act. I'll have the twins come say goodbye before you leave. Lance and Jeannie appeared as Ted was checking his briefcase one last time. They performed their expected roles perfectly, the dutiful children saying goodbye to their father. Bring us something from Spain, Dad, Jeannie said, hugging him quickly. Yeah, and take lots of pictures, Lance added, barely looking up from his phone. Ted hugged them both, wondering if they could feel how stiff and formal the embrace was. These children who had never been his, who had laughed at his ignorance behind his back. Be good for your mother, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The car arrived right on schedule, not his usual driver, but one arranged by Dawn. Ted kissed Madeline goodbye one last time, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of his life. As the car pulled away, he saw Madeline already on her phone, probably calling Phil with updates. The twins had already disappeared back inside, uninterested in watching their supposed father leave. The car didn't head to Logan International as expected. Instead, it took a series of carefully planned detours, eventually arriving at a private airfield where a different plane waited. Ted Kinney boarded a flight to Madrid. Michael Chun boarded a flight to Bangkok. Back in Boston, Madeline was already helping the twins pack for their summer in Barcelona. She hummed happily as she sorted through her jewelry, deciding what to take, unaware that her carefully planned future was dissolving with each passing hour. In her office at Kinney Construction, Kimberly sat at her computer, waiting for Carol's signal. Multiple emails were drafted, each containing carefully selected documents and evidence. The recipients included the SEC, FBI, and major news outlets. Her finger hovered over the send button, ready to execute the final phase of Ted's plan. 1 month later, Madeline Kinney's morning routine was interrupted by a loud pounding on the front door. She opened it to find federal agents with search warrants, and her world began to crumble. The morning paper lay on her designer coffee table, its headline screaming in bold type. Construction magnate's empire reveals massive fraud scheme. Below it, smaller headlines added to the devastation. Art dealer's money laundering operation exposed and corporate espionage plot uncovered. Lance stormed into the living room, waving his phone. Mom, my tuition payment bounced. The school says I can't come back next semester. Before Madeline could respond, Jeannie rushed in from the garden. My riding instructor just called. All my competition entries have been canceled. She says our checks were rejected. Madeline's own phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Their assets were frozen. The houses, all of them, had been sold weeks ago. The company had been transferred to employee ownership. This is impossible, she whispered, trying to access their accounts. Every password had been changed, every trust fund dissolved. Phil wasn't answering his phone. His art gallery was closed, a notice of federal investigation posted on the door. His house in Barcelona, the one they'd planned to escape to, had been seized by European authorities. The twins sat shell-shocked on the designer couch that probably wouldn't be theirs much longer. Their dreams of European luxury had evaporated like morning mist. No more private school, no more equestrian competitions, no more pretending to be part of Boston's elite. How could he do this to us? Lance demanded, his arrogance crumbling in the face of reality. Do this to us? Jeannie's laugh was hysterical. We're the ones who betrayed him. We're the ones who... She trailed off as federal agents began cataloging the home's contents. Madeline sank into her favorite armchair, the same one where she'd sat plotting with Phil all those years. The newspaper articles painted a damning picture: decades of fraud, money laundering through fake art sales, corporate espionage, planned hostile takeover. Every secret exposed, every lie revealed. Meanwhile, on a sunny beach in Thailand, Ted, now living as Michael Chen, sipped a cocktail and read the news on his tablet. His old life had burned to ashes, but from them, he'd built something new: freedom. His phone, A secure line known only to Carol buzzed with a message. He opened it to find a series of news articles. Boston socialite and international art dealer indicted for fraud, and DNA scandal rocks private school as paternity questions emerge. Attached was a photo taken by one of Carol's contacts, Madeline being led into the federal building for questioning, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide her devastation. Behind her, Phil was being escorted in handcuffs, his sophisticated facade shattered. The twins, their parentage now public knowledge, faced their own crisis. Their friends had turned on them, their social media accounts flooded with mockery and disdain. The very society circles they'd hoped to dominate now shunned them completely. Ted closed his tablet and walked along the shore, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The warm sand between his toes felt nothing like the manicured lawns of his Boston estate. The sound of waves replaced the noise of corporate boardrooms. A message from Dawn confirmed that his new identities remained secure, his cryptocurrency fortune untraceable. She'd kept her word. He'd vanished completely, leaving behind a perfectly executed plan that dismantled the lies his life had been built on. Carol's final update was brief. It's done? They'll never recover from this. Ted typed back a simple response. Good. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued his walk along the beach. Sometimes, the best revenge wasn't about violence or confrontation. Sometimes, it was simply about living well and letting karma handle the rest. The sun dipped below the horizon, taking with it the last remnants of Ted Kinney's old life. Tomorrow would bring a new day, a new identity, a new beginning. But for now, he simply walked along the shore, finally at peace with the knowledge that justice, in its own way, had been served. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, was a far cry from the luxury Madeline Kinney had once known. Her designer clothes had been replaced by prison orange, her spa treatments by strictly scheduled yard time. After 5 years, she still hadn't adjusted to the harsh fluorescent lighting that made her premature wrinkles more pronounced. Visitor for you, Kinney, the guard announced, leading her to the visiting area. Jeannie sat at one of the metal tables, looking nothing like the privileged teenager she'd been. At 21, she wore simple clothes from a discount store, her once perfectly maintained hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No more equestrian competitions or designer outfits. She worked as a receptionist at a local veterinary clinic, attending community college at night. Hi, Mom, she said quietly, no longer the entitled child who had mocked the man she'd called father. Darling. Madeline reached for her daughter's hands, but Jeannie kept them in her lap. How's your brother? Still working construction in Nevada, Jeannie replied. Entry-level stuff. Ironic, isn't it? He finally ended up in the family business, just not the way we planned. Lance had taken the fall harder than his sister. His dreams of attending an elite university had evaporated with their trust funds. The boy who once sneered at manual labor now spent his days doing exactly that, learning the trade from the ground up, just as Ted once had. And Madeline hesitated. Your father? Which one? Jeannie's laugh was bitter. Ted? Nobody's heard from him in 5 years. He's gone, probably living his best life somewhere while we deal with this mess. Or do you mean Phil? Still got 12 years left in federal prison, last I heard. The international money laundering charges really did him in. Phil Melendez, once the sophisticated art dealer from Barcelona, now resided in a maximum security facility. His international art fraud scheme had attracted attention from multiple governments. The man who had plotted to steal another's fortune had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, and even his family. Have you spoken to Carol lately? Madeline asked, trying to change the subject. Why would he speak to me? He's busy running the company, successfully, I might add. They just opened their 5th international office. Jeannie's expression hardened. The employees' trust was the best thing that could have happened to them. The stock value has tripled. Kimberly, had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer, her loyalty and integrity rewarded. She'd implemented new transparency policies that made the company stronger than ever. The boardroom where Madeline had once plotted corporate espionage now hosted employee profit-sharing meetings. I saw the Hendersons at the grocery store last week, Jeannie continued. Remember them? They used to be at all your charity events. Mrs. Henderson turned down the aisle rather than face me. Guess that's still happening after 5 years. Boston's elite social circles, which had once been Madeline's playground, now shunned any connection to the scandal. The charity board she'd sat on, the social clubs she dominated, all had erased her name from their records. The society pages now track the rise of younger, more honest socialites. Your trust fund, Madeline began, was transferred to scholarship programs for employees' children. Jeannie cut her off. I know. 3 kids are attending college now because of what used to be my horse-showing money. Good for them. The prestigious private school that Lance and Jeannie had attended now used their case in ethics seminars. Their former classmates had gone on to elite universities while they struggled to rebuild their lives from scratch. Meanwhile, across the world, a successful entrepreneur named Michael Chun had built a respectable consulting business in Thailand. His expertise helped small construction companies grow sustainably, his reputation for integrity drawing clients from across Southeast Asia. Few knew that Michael Chun had once been Ted Kinney, and those who did kept his secret. Carol visited occasionally on business trips, bringing news of Boston that he knew Ted still wanted to hear, despite everything. They never discussed the family that had betrayed him, focusing instead on the company's success and the positive changes their actions had brought about. Ted had found peace in his new life. His beachfront home was smaller than his Boston mansion, but filled with genuine friendships and honest relationships. He'd even started dating again, a local businesswoman who appreciated him for who he was, not what he owned. Dawn Harper had done her job well. Despite extensive investigations, no one had ever tracked down Ted Kinney or his fortune. The cryptocurrency wallets she'd established remained secure, their contents funding charitable works through untraceable donations. Ted had found that helping others anonymously brought more satisfaction than all his previous displays of wealth. Darren Brown still worked as a private investigator in Boston, his role in Ted's disappearance known to very few. He'd gained a reputation for exposing corporate fraud, his experience with the Kinney case making him particularly effective. Occasionally, he'd receive an anonymous tip that helped crack a case. The emails untraceable, but the writing style oddly familiar. Back in the prison visiting room, Madeline watched her daughter stand to leave. Will you come again next month? I don't know, Mom. Between work and school. We'll see. Jeannie paused. Lance asked me to tell you. He's using Dad's name now. Ted's name. Said it's a reminder to be a better person. After Jeannie left, Madeline returned to her cell, past the common room where a television played the local news. A story about Kinney Construction's latest charitable initiative caught her attention, a program providing construction training to underprivileged youth. She watched Carol Lancaster present the project, standing confidently where she had once expected Phil to stand. That night, in her narrow prison bed, Madeline dreamed of her old life, the parties, the plotting, the perfect lies. She woke to the reality of concrete walls and strict schedules, another day of consequences stretching before her. On the other side of the world, Ted sat in his beach house office, reviewing reports from his consulting business. A framed photo on his desk showed him with a group of local builders whose businesses he'd helped develop. Their success had become his redemption, their gratitude washing away the bitterness of his past. His phone buzzed, a message from Carol. Just met your namesake. Lance is doing well in Nevada, working hard, learning the trade. He asks about you sometimes, through channels. Should I tell him anything? Ted stared at the message for a long time before replying. Tell him hard work and honesty build stronger foundations than quick schemes and lies. He'll understand eventually. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in colors no artist, certainly not Phil, could capture. Ted stepped onto his balcony, breathing in the salt air. His tablet showed news from Boston, another charity initiative from his old company, another success story from the employees' trust, another small piece of good growing from the ashes of betrayal. 5 years had changed everything, and nothing. The perfect lie had been exposed, its architects punished, its victims either redeemed or condemned by their own choices. Ted had lost a false family but gained a true purpose. His revenge had been complete, but his victory lay not in their downfall but in his own resurrection. As darkness settled over the beach, Ted raised a glass to the horizon. To karma, he whispered, the great equalizer. In prison cells and construction sites, in veterinary clinics and corner offices, in Boston's society gatherings and Thailand's business meetings, the ripples of one man's response to betrayal continued to spread. Some called it revenge, others called it justice, but Ted knew the truth. Sometimes the best revenge was simply living well and letting time reveal the consequences of each person's choices. The perfect lie had crumbled, but from its ruins, various truths had emerged. Some bitter, some sweet, all transformative. In the end, everyone had received exactly what they had earned. No more, no less. And perhaps that was the greatest justice of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business. My dad ran the local hardware store, and my mom kept our home warm and welcoming. I had an older sister who, despite occasional sibling rivalry, always looked out for me. Life was simple, filled with helping at the store or playing sports with friends. My parents emphasized hard work and honesty, and my life was mostly straightforward. Things changed during my teenage years when I attended a prestigious all-boys private school, thanks to my parents' belief in education. It was there that I first encountered social class differences. The wealthy kids often reminded me of my lower middle-class background, leading to frequent verbal and physical fights. Despite the odds, I managed to hold my own. During this time, I met Greg Sands, a boxer who would become my best friend and change my life. Why do people do what they do? It's a question I often ponder, especially regarding those I love. My wife is unfaithful, though she thinks I'm unaware. The truth is, I've known for a while. My upbringing was normal, loving parents and an older sister. My parents valued education, so I ended up at a strict all-boys private school that prioritized football, religion, and academics. Being middle class among wealthy students was tough, and I never fit in. Snobby rich kids targeted me, and I frequently got into fights. To channel my frustrations, I joined a boxing class at the Police Boys Club. This decision changed my life. I met kids like me and, more importantly, Greg Sands. Greg, a talented boxer and the son of a cop, quickly became my best friend. After an initial knockout in the ring, we became inseparable. Greg also attended my school, thanks to his dad's connections, and together, we handled the bullies. One day, a bully insulted my family and I snapped, breaking his nose and knocking out some teeth. Greg, always loyal, had my back and took care of the other bullies. While Greg was kind to his friends, he was ruthless to his enemies. We quickly dealt with a few more reinforcements and thought nothing of it. They had done this to me before, and I usually tried to plot revenge, though it rarely worked. However, making rich enemies was a mistake. Douglas's father, a powerful businessman, was furious. He got Sandman and me suspended for the rest of the year, even though only a month of classes remained. He also had us charged with attack. Luckily, witnesses from the girls' school backed our story, confirming that Douglas started it. Sandman's dad, the deputy chief, also helped. While the attack charges were dropped, the suspension stuck, and Douglas's father even tried to make my parents pay for his son's surgery. I spent the summer working at my dad's hardware store, staying out of trouble. Sandman and I hung out, hit the gym, and ran together. He even tried to hit on my older sister, but she was headed to college and wasn't interested. Life stayed pretty much the same throughout school. Douglas Peterson vowed revenge, but I knew it wouldn't be physical since he'd met his match. Sandman became the heavyweight state champ, and I did well too, placing in the top 10. Sandman thought about turning pro, but didn't want to end up like his bitter uncle, who was broken from boxing. In our final year, we started dating girls from the neighboring school, and with our cars, we spent a lot of time cruising around. I lost my pureness to Susan Bates, but it wasn't love, just good times. Meanwhile, Douglas never forgave me for humiliating him. He had everything: money, looks, power, but he was only happy when hurting someone. He sought revenge by dating Susan, thinking I loved her, but I wasn't too bothered. Sandman and I eventually decided the Army was the best option since my family couldn't afford college. We enlisted together, missing prom due to basic training, which didn't bother us. I quickly realized the Army wasn't for me beyond my initial commitment, but Sandman thrived in uniform and aimed for special forces. After basic training, I returned home before starting officer training. Sandman teased me, but I knew I could handle it and eventually earn a business degree. This marked the first time in years we'd be apart, and I didn't realize it would be many years before I saw him again. Officer training went smoothly, and I graduated as Second Lieutenant Roger Easton. The business degree required more Army time, extending my commitment by 3 years. I was assigned to the Army History Unit, which meant office work, but I enjoyed learning about Army traditions and history, thanks to a great sergeant. I hadn't heard from Sandman in a while, as he was deployed in dangerous areas. I worried, but knew he was well trained. Meanwhile, I found stability in my routine, studying for my degree and boxing when I could. The only thing missing was a good woman. Though I dated and had flings, I hadn't found someone I connected with, until everything changed. I returned to my hometown for a music festival weekend, planning to visit my parents, Sandman's folks, and catch up with friends over some beers. On Friday night, I got the latest updates. My dad was thinking about selling the hardware store and retiring, and Sandman's dad had become the police chief, though they hadn't heard from Sandman due to the secretive nature of his work. Saturday morning, after my run and breakfast, I helped my dad open the store. That's when I ran into Susan Bates, now Susan Peterson, who was in town for the festival with her cousin, Kelly. Susan mentioned Doug was overseas on business, and she introduced me to Kelly, who was stunning. We agreed to meet up at the festival later. My dad teased me about Susan being on the prowl despite her marriage, but I only had eyes for Kelly. After catching up with friends, I headed to the festival, where I found Susan, drunk and flirting with everyone, while Kelly looked uncomfortable. I joined them, bought drinks and food, and endured Susan's endless chatter about her life. She married Doug right after graduation, but it was likely a rifle wedding due to a pregnancy that ended in a mishap. Doug now managed international business for his father's company. Eventually, Susan left with Peter Morrison to check out his car, and Kelly, relieved, joked about her cousin's departure. We spent the rest of the evening getting to know each other, finding we had much in common. Kelly worked as a human resources manager at Peterson Corporation thanks to Susan's help. We ended the night exchanging numbers and planned a date for the following week. Things moved quickly between us, and after nearly 2 years of dating, we were very close. Kelly was traditional and wanted to wait until marriage for Zex, which was frustrating but allowed us to grow closer emotionally. Despite the occasional presence of Susan and the lingering shadow of Doug, we made it work. Kelly's parents, though wealthier, accepted me, especially since her father, a retired general, and I found common ground through the military. After completing my degree, I proposed to Kelly, and she accepted. Her father gave his blessing, though her mother, less thrilled, insisted on a prenuptial agreement, likely influenced by Doug. The wedding went smoothly, though Sandman couldn't attend. His younger brother stepped in as my best man, and thankfully, Doug was overseas. It was a wonderful day, and even better, Kelly and I discovered we were just as compatible in bed as out. Life moved on as expected. We bought a nice house in a good neighborhood and started planning for the future. We both wanted kids, but first I had to decide between staying in the Army or switching to civilian life. We agreed I should use my degree, so I began looking for a new career. I got lucky and landed a job at a major bank overseeing internal and external security. The pay was double what I made in the Army, so I left the military. We immediately started trying for kids, but nothing happened. After a doctor's visit, I found out I was sterile. I planned to break the news to Kelly during a surprise cruise, but things changed when she announced she'd been promoted and would be traveling with Doug Peterson, now her boss, on a business trip. I had a bad feeling, but couldn't say much. Kelly assured me Doug had changed and was all business. The morning she left, Doug arrived in a limo with a grin, and they drove off. I spent the next few days sulking. Kelly called, saying everything was fine. Then, on Saturday morning, there was a knock at the door. It was Sandman. He looked tougher and more world-weary, but that's what war does. We hugged, grabbed beers, and caught up. Sandman had left the Army after 10 years, tired of the liquidating. I updated him on my life, including the connection to Doug, and we laughed about Susan marrying him. As we talked, Sandman recognized General Bates, Kelly's father, from my wedding photos. He revealed that General Bates had been his commander in Special Forces and hinted at Mrs. Bates's affairs with officers, explaining that this led to the general's retirement to avoid scandal. This revelation left me questioning the family I had married into. I invited Sandman to stay the night, but he had to leave. Before going, he mentioned he was starting police academy training on Monday. He promised to visit again when Kelly returned. As I mulled over everything, I couldn't help but worry about Doug and Kelly, especially given the new information about her family. The next week flew by with work keeping me busy. Kelly called a few times, and by Friday night, she was home. She seemed like her usual self, and we spent the night reconnecting. The next day, I told Kelly about Sandman's return and arranged for them to meet. When Sandman arrived with flowers and wine, I was about to introduce him to Kelly when suddenly, "Oh my God, Greg, you're Sandman," Kelly exclaimed. "Hi, Kelly. Good to see you," Sandman replied. I was shocked. Turns out Kelly knew Sandman from the army base when her dad was in charge. They caught up for hours, and I felt like a third wheel. While cooking dinner, I overheard something like, "Does he know?" When I asked what they meant, they both looked awkward. Sandman left, saying Kelly and I needed to talk. Kelly explained that she and Sandman had dated on the base with her dad's approval, but broke up when Sandman went to Iraq. She assured me it was all in the past. But I realized Sandman still had feelings for her, which explained why he avoided our wedding. I asked Kelly if this would be a problem, and she said no, that she loved only me. Still, I was upset neither of them had mentioned it earlier. When I called Sandman, he apologized, saying he didn't want to stir up old issues. I accepted his explanation. Life continued, with Kelly busier than ever in her new job, and kids took a back seat, so I didn't bring up my sterility. Sandman became a cop and joined the pill squad. But at home, things started to change. Our sex life dwindled as Kelly worked late and traveled with Doug more often. I began to suspect something was wrong. Needing time to think, I decided to help my dad close his store as he retired. Kelly supported the idea, saying she'd be busy with work all week anyway. At the store, Dad surprised me by suggesting I protect myself, hinting at rumors that Kelly was behaving like her cousin Susan. He gently told me that Doug was bragging about sleeping with Kelly 3 times a week. I was furious. It's one thing to suspect, but hearing it confirmed hit hard. I realized I'd been a fool. I decided to confront Susan Peterson directly. Hearing she was at her parents' estate, I drove over. When I arrived, I asked Susan bluntly, "Is Doug sleeping with my wife?" She looked shocked and replied, "You don't mess around, Roger." "Well, it's all over town," I said. Susan broke down in tears and explained she had left Doug and was now back living at home, with divorce on the horizon. She revealed they were forced into marriage and resented each other from the start. Doug openly cheated, even keeping an apartment near his office for his affairs. In response, Susan began having her own affairs out of spite. Things came to a head when Doug admitted he was involved with Kelly and that it was only a matter of time before she moved in. That was Susan's breaking point, and she left. We talked more, but I was beyond sympathy. Susan vowed to make Doug pay, but I wanted my own revenge. I wished her well, hoping it would be the last time we spoke. When I got home, my parents were out, and Kelly had left a note saying she needed to talk urgently. Ignoring her calls, I grabbed a beer and sat on the deck. My parents returned later, and after a few more beers, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast and had a quiet meal with my folks before heading to the store for the final handover. After lunch, Dad and I went fishing, and he agreed I should confront the situation directly. When we got back, Kelly's BMW was in the driveway. Inside, she was sitting with tissues, having talked to my mom. My parents quickly left, giving us space. Kelly broke down, explaining that Susan had called to say she was divorcing Doug, and mentioned I knew about Doug's so-called late meetings. Panicked, Kelly had driven straight to my parents' house to talk. Through tears, Kelly insisted she wasn't having an affair with Doug. She claimed the late meetings were legitimate, and that Susan had started the rumors to break us up. Kelly also said she would stop attending late meetings with Doug. Her story seemed rehearsed, and I didn't buy it. I knew Susan didn't love me, Doug hated me, and the Bates women had a reputation for cheating. I realized Kelly was now the enemy, but I needed evidence before confronting her. I pretended to forgive her, putting on a convincing act. We went out to dinner, and she left the next morning, happy and unaware of my suspicions. Once she was gone, I called Sandman to help with surveillance on Kelly. I also asked my dad to tell Kelly I was staying until Sunday, buying time to gather more information. After packing my car, I said goodbye and headed back to the city. Sandman still hadn't returned my call, but I didn't worry about it. I checked into a hotel far enough from anyone Kelly or I knew, then went to work to greet my boss and request another week off, which he approved. While there, I opened a new bank account in my name and transferred half of our joint savings, ensuring my future paychecks would go into it. Feeling more secure, I returned to the hotel and tried calling Sandman again, still no answer. I headed to the bar for a beer and chatted with the bartender until my dad called to check in. After a few beers, I decided to call it a day, paid my tab, and went back to my room to shower and change. Just as I was leaving for a late lunch, Sandman finally called back. He apologized for the delay, explaining he'd just been promoted to detective. We agreed to meet at a local bar. At the bar, which turned out to be a cop hangout, we found a booth and ordered beers. I told Sandman everything. The rumors about Kelly and Doug, the late meetings, and Kelly's changed behavior. Sandman listened and then jokingly asked if I wanted Doug kneecapped. We laughed but then got serious. We needed evidence of the affair, and Sandman promised to handle it, using his connections. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover but followed Sandman's advice to act normal. I canceled my leave and told Kelly I'd be home that night. She welcomed me warmly, and over dinner she suggested starting a family. I knew it was pointless given my condition, but I said nothing. As weeks passed, I grew anxious waiting for Sandman's update. Kelly questioned our joint account balance, and I made up a story about lending Dad money, which satisfied her. Finally, in early December, Sandman called with news, and we met again at the same bar. He handed me an envelope saying it was good news. The private investigator's report cleared Kelly. She had been faithful, just living her routine life. Doug, on the other hand, was a mess, involved with multiple women, gambling, and pills. Sandman revealed that Doug was about to be busted for cocaine, and his downfall would make headlines. It was the perfect Christmas gift. I bought a round for the bar, then headed home to my wife. Sandman promised to visit over the weekend. When I got home, Kelly was all over me, and we had intense, passionate sex. Afterwards, she surprised me by saying, "You're going to be a father." I was shocked, but Kelly mistook my reaction for excitement. She happily shared her pregnancy news, explaining she wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell me. She then started talking about the nursery, baby shower, and maternity leave. But I zoned out. The realization that I was being deceived hit hard. As a logical person, I quickly concluded that the baby couldn't be mine because I was sterile. I knew Kelly had to go, but I needed to play it smart. I couldn't believe Kelly thought she could pass off the baby as mine, given our near non-existent sex life. I tossed and turned, watching her sleep peacefully, anger boiling inside me. Unable to stay in bed, I went downstairs to my study. I even considered using my weapon, but decided against it. I knew I needed a plan. I realized my life was built on lies. I concluded that the baby wasn't mine. Kelly was a cheater, Sandman had betrayed me, and Doug was just a pawn. Feeling surrounded by enemies, I knew I had to pretend everything was normal while planning my next move. My first step was to reach out to Doug Peterson. The next morning, I left early, made a call to Doug's office, and left an urgent message. By mid-morning, it was clear he wasn't going to call back. I didn't want to risk going to his office and being seen by Kelly or her colleagues, so I decided to follow him instead. I rented an SUV and waited outside his office. When Doug left, I discreetly followed him to an apartment building. Seizing the moment, I pulled up, grabbed him, and drove off. Doug was terrified, thinking I was going to eliminate him, but I assured him I just wanted to talk. We drove to a secluded spot by a lake where I handed him the report Sandman had compiled. As Doug read it, he muttered that it was all lies, blaming Susan. I told him the report was from Greg Sands, not Susan. Doug realized he was in deeper trouble than he thought. Doug turned even paler, convinced I was going to eliminate him. Instead, I surprised him by saying I didn't believe most of the report, except that he likely cheated on his wife. I then stunned him further by saying we needed to help each other. Doug, a weak figurehead controlled by his father, wasn't the playboy the report claimed, but he was still vulnerable. I told Doug that he needed to leave town immediately because Sandman was planning to frame him with pills and get him arrested. Doug was bewildered, asking why I was helping him and why Sandman was targeting him. I explained that I needed his father's connections to dig into Sandman's background. Doug called his father, arranged to leave the country, and handed me the phone. Reluctantly, Mr. Peterson Sr. agreed to provide a full report on Sandman within a few days. As for why Sandman was doing this, I couldn't give Doug a clear answer. I suspected it was Sandman's twisted way of revenge. I waited with Doug until his father's people arrived to take him away, knowing this would delay Sandman's plans and buy me time to figure things out. I returned to the city, dropped off the rental, and decided to lay low. Needing a break from everything, I accepted an assignment from work that sent me on a 2-week trip to regional offices. Kelly wasn't thrilled about my sudden departure, but I reminded her that I needed to keep my boss happy with the baby on the way, which quieted her. The 2 weeks passed quickly, but I had trouble reaching Mr. Peterson Sr. for the report. On my last day, a courier delivered a thick package, the report on Greg Sands. I spent half the night reading it, pausing several times for straight whiskey as the details unsettled me. The Greg Sands I knew at 18 had turned into a twisted individual by 28. The report revealed his violent childhood, including witnessing his mother's homicide. His stepmother and father tried to manage his rage by enrolling him in boxing, which led to his success as a champion. But the man he had become was far more dangerous than I had imagined. The report answered all my questions but provided no comfort. I realized I was just collateral damage in a long-standing power struggle. Worse, if Sandman discovered I knew the truth, he would likely eliminate me. There wasn't much of interest until Greg Sands joined the Army. That's when everything became clear, and I realized I needed to distance myself. I knew about our basic training, but the real revelations came after Sandman completed Special Forces training. The key figure was General Edward Bates, who led Sandman's unit. They clashed constantly. Bates was ruthless, while Sandman valued righteousness and his men. Their biggest conflict? Sandman's relationship with Bates's daughter, Kelly. Initially, Sandman got involved with Kelly to spite Bates, but it quickly became serious. Kelly resembled Sandman's late mother, which deepened his attachment. Things fell apart when Sandman proposed, and Kelly refused, saying she needed her father's approval. Shortly after, Bates sent Sandman's unit on dangerous missions, culminating in a disastrous operation that left many dead or injured, including Sandman. Bates retired in disgrace, and Kelly ended things with Sandman, following her father's wishes despite her love for him. Afterward, Sandman plotted revenge. When he learned I was marrying Kelly, he saw a new opportunity. He left the military, became a cop in my city, and planned to ruin Kelly's reputation by seducing her, getting her pregnant, and causing a scandal. His ultimate goal was to destroy Bates by using Peterson Sr.'s influence after framing Doug Peterson. But I derailed his plans by helping Doug escape. I knew Sandman would come after me once he realized what happened. My first move was to get Kelly out of town, hoping it would distract Sandman. Then I had to decide whether to stay and face him or leave before things escalated. When I returned home, it was too quiet. Our dog was gone and Kelly's clothes were missing. In the kitchen, I found a note from Kelly saying she had a business meeting and that our dog was with my parents. It seemed like an excuse, and I suspected she was with Sandman. To confirm, I called the police station and learned Sandman was on a 2-week vacation. Realizing I might be jumping to conclusions, I decided to call Peterson Sr. Surprisingly, he answered, "What do you want, trailer trash? You got the report, didn't you?" Peterson sneered. "Yeah, thanks," I replied, though it was a week late. He asked, "Why are you wasting my time?" "I'm trying to find my wife, Kelly Easton," I said. He laughed and asked, "How's your marriage going?" Then he added, "She's at a meeting with Brett White, the temporary CEO. I thanked him, but before hanging up, he couldn't resist a jab. No doubt White's giving her the bedroom tour. I realized Kelly had actually told the truth, but I still worried, where's Sandman? I got my answer the next morning. I woke up determined to end the charade. I'm divorcing Kelly and moving on. Let Sandman have the Bates clan. I'm done with this sick game. I knew I had loved Kelly, but her betrayal destroyed our future. Revenge was tempting, but my sanity mattered more. While I was deep in thought, Kelly called. I ignored it, not ready to hide my contempt. After a shower and coffee, I headed to work, where I made a lawyer appointment and cleared out our bank accounts. I wanted my assets liquid and on hand. At 10 a.m., my life took another turn. A courier delivered a package with familiar handwriting. Inside was a videotape and 2 notes. One read, "I know," written in what looked like blood. The second was a newspaper clipping. Peterson Corporation CEO found dead. Doug Peterson had been found dead on a beach, with police treating it as foul play. I didn't need to watch the tape. I knew it contained Doug's confession. My military instincts kicked in. I left the office, ignoring my secretary, and drove out of the city. I realized 3 things. Doug had confessed to Sandman. Sandman could find me anywhere, and he was going to eliminate me for ruining his plans. I drove to my old sergeant, Brian Moses, who had connections and could help me disappear. When I arrived, Brian was relaxing on the beach. I hated dragging him into this, but had no choice. "Lieutenant, what brings you here?" Brian asked. "I need your help, Brian. I need to disappear. No questions asked," I said. Understanding the seriousness, Brian made a call and took me downstairs for a quick photo session to create a new identity. We avoided the heavy topic and ate while waiting. An hour later, a guy arrived to handle the new identity. Brian put me up for the night, and as I tried to relax, my thoughts drifted to Kelly. Concerned for her safety, I made a call. She answered almost immediately. "Kelly, listen carefully. Get your things and leave the hotel immediately. Don't go home to your parents or mine," I urged. Kelly laughed. Roger, what are you talking about? Are you drunk? No, Kelly, stay away from Sandman and run for your life, I warned. Why would I do that? She asked, confused. Kelly, I know everything, including that the baby is Sandman's. He's not who you think he is. You've been warned, I said firmly. Before she could respond, I hung up and smashed my phone to prevent any tracking. I worried for my parents, but believed Sandman was focused on me, Kelly, and the General. After a few drinks with Brian, I went to bed. The next morning, I paid $10,000 for a new identity, now Justin Green, with all the necessary documents. I left the ID materials with Brian, who promised to arrange a new vehicle for me. But first, I needed Roger Easton to die. Years ago, a soldier under my command told me about his small hometown, Hell. It had a corrupt police force, but few major crimes, perfect for my plan. That night, I visited a nearby town's morgue, easily bribing the night attendant to let me see the John Doe bodies. I found one that matched my size and shape. Another bribe ensured the attendant would forget me. He mentioned he'd be on duty Saturday night, which fit my plan perfectly. I arrived in Hell and booked a motel for 4 nights, making sure the staff remembered my name. The next morning, I made myself known around town, meeting locals, including the mayor, and telling them I'd be staying for a few days. After breakfast, I found the ideal spot for my staged end of life, a notorious cliff just outside Hell where many had driven off to their end of lives. Everything was falling into place. Next, I needed transport for Saturday night. After some searching, I found a dirt bike for sale on a small farm, bought it, and loaded it into my truck. Later, I stopped at the diner for a late lunch and met Sheriff Baxter. He seemed lazy and incompetent, confirming my decision to avoid his recommended bar. That night, I visited a busy but seedy local bar. I had some drinks, made jokes with the locals, and bought rounds for everyone, which quickly made me popular. This place would work perfectly for Saturday night. Afterward, I drove to the cliff outside town, hid my dirt bike, helmet, and clothes, and then returned to the motel to sleep. I woke up early Saturday, confident everything was set. After breakfast at the diner, where I chatted with the locals and left a generous tip, I returned to the motel to eliminate time by watching TV and reviewing my plan. Lunch at a local restaurant followed, with more small talk and another big tip. By early evening, it was time to head to the morgue. I parked behind the morgue, hoping the same attendant was on duty. As expected, he left soon after, likely to score pills or booze. I quickly picked the lock, retrieved the John Doe body, and confirmed there were no new security measures. With the body loaded in my truck, I drove to the cliff, hit it, and went back into town. At the motel, I showered, changed clothes, and left everything behind before heading to the bar. The place was packed, just as I hoped. The locals welcomed me, remembering the generous out-of-towner. I bought drinks, acted increasingly drunk, and started buying shots for everyone. I barely drank, discreetly leaving bottles behind, but everyone thought I was having a wild night. At one point, the bartender, concerned, suggested I give him my truck keys. Thinking quickly, I threw $500 on the bar, yelled, "Drinks for everyone," and slipped out as the crowd surged to the bar. I staggered to my truck, keeping up the act, and drove off, weaving until I was out of sight. I reached the cliff, parked, and retrieved the body from the bushes. Stripping off my clothes, I dressed the body in them, then soaked the truck and the body in whiskey. I opened the fuel tank, placed a fuel-soaked rag in it, and started the engine. As the truck rolled toward the edge, I lit the rag and watched it plunge down the cliff and explode. I hopped on my dirt bike and rode off, heading for my freedom. Early the next morning, I arrived at Brian Moses' beach house. Brian had bought me a knock-up truck and made an offer. I could hide out in a remote cabin his late father owned near a town called Last Chance. I agreed, feeling it was a fitting place to lay low. Before I left, Brian gave me a phone and warned, "Only use this to receive messages from me. If you get an emergency text, leave immediately." After grabbing my new ID and clothes, I hugged Brian and drove to the cabin. The directions were easy to follow, and I arrived by lunchtime. The cabin was isolated and perfect for hiding out. I settled in, determined to grow a beard and change my appearance before venturing into town. Brian had stocked enough supplies to last a month. My only thought now was, I hope everyone believes I'm dead. I began working out daily, using the trails for long-distance running to get back in shape. A week later, I received a text from Brian. "Roger Easton is dead. Funeral next week. We'll watch over your family." I felt guilty about the pain I was causing my family, but it was necessary for their safety. I didn't hear from Brian for the rest of the month. 3 weeks into my new life as Justin Green, I was satisfied with my progress. I'd lost weight and grown a decent beard, though I wanted another week before venturing into town. Finally, I decided to watch the video Sandman had sent. It was brutal. Doug Peterson had been tortured and confessed everything, including my involvement. The butcher, dressed in black and masked, was clearly Sandman. At the end of the video, Sandman threatened, "I'm coming to eliminate you, Roger, and destroy everything you hold dear." Watching the video enraged me. Sandman was no longer just a threat. He was a sick, deluded butcher who enjoyed his work. His ability to switch his rage on and off terrified me. I realized he wouldn't stop until he finished off his enemies, and my family could be next. I couldn't live in fear forever. Motivated by the video, I intensified my training, pushing myself to my limits. By week 5, I was ready to venture into town. I kept a low profile, bought supplies, and picked up a laptop with internet access. I also bought a 7mm semi-auto rifle, a 9mm SIG P228, and plenty of ammunition. At a pawn shop, I found an old boxing bag and gloves. On my way back to the cabin, I saw a sign for puppies. I stopped and bought a border collie puppy, Jess, to keep me company and serve as an early warning system. Back at the cabin, I settled in, set up my purchases, and fed Jess. Later, I searched online for news about Roger Easton. I found a local newspaper article titled, "Drunken Man Burns to End of Life Near Hell." It described how Roger Easton, a visitor well known to locals, had gotten drunk, driven off a cliff, and died in a fiery crash. Sheriff Baxter confirmed no suspicious circumstances. The only other mentions were about my funeral arrangements, indicating the plan had worked, at least temporarily. For the next 6 months, I lived in isolation, with Jess as my only companion. I ventured into town once a month, where people called me Grizzly Adams due to my beard and long hair. I trained hard, regained my army fitness, and sharpened my shooting skills. Brian occasionally texted me, and I rarely used the internet. One July day, I checked my hometown's local paper and found troubling news. The Easton hardware store had burned down under suspicious circumstances 5 months earlier. Though the new owner had kept the name, I knew Sandman was behind it. It confirmed that he hadn't forgotten about the Easton family. What disturbed me most was a story about the tragic end of lives of a wealthy family. The article likened it to the Kennedy curse, starting with Susan Bates's end of life. She fell down the stairs in a drunken stupor and broke her neck. On the day of her funeral, her parents, along with General Bates and his wife, died in a car crash on the way to the service. This left Kelly Bates Easton as the sole heiress of the Bates fortune. The article mentioned Kelly was deeply traumatized, having recently lost her husband to self-destruction. I found that odd, since my end of life had only been reported as an accident. This new detail made me suspect Kelly was more involved in these events than I had initially thought. 2 other stories caught my eye. One was a wedding announcement. Kelly Bates Easton had married Greg Sands a month ago. The other was about Douglas Peterson Sr. suffering a heart attack and being airlifted to a city hospital. I wasn't sure if Sandman was involved, but I knew I had to stop hiding and take control. My first stop would be the hospital to see Peterson Sr., followed by a visit to Sandman. I packed quickly, grabbed my SIG P228 and my dog Jess, and hit the road. Jess, sensing my tension, was nervous on the drive. We arrived at Brian's beach house in the afternoon. He didn't recognize me at first, but Jess jumping all over him gave me away. "Lieutenant, nice look, Bigfoot," Brian laughed as we hugged. He invited me in for a beer, and after settling Jess with some water and snacks, I decided to tell Brian everything. I spent a couple of hours recounting the whole story, from my history with Sandman to Kelly's affair, her pregnancy, faking my end of life, and the recent end of lives of the Bates and Peterson families. I also showed him the reports and newspaper articles I had gathered, asking him to keep them safe in case anything happened to me. Brian was serious. "Lieutenant, Special Forces guys like Sandman aren't to be messed with. He's gone rogue." "I know, Brian, but I can't live in fear. I have to stop him," I replied. Brian offered to help, but I insisted he stay out of it, asking him instead to protect my family if things went wrong. After some convincing, he reluctantly agreed. Brian's biggest concern was whether I could actually eliminate Sandman. "If it's eliminate or be liquidated, I'll have to," I said, aware that I was up against a trained butcher with power and resources. I knew my chances were slim, but I had no choice. I had never considered liquidating anyone, but as the saying goes, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. I'd run long enough. It was time to face the music. Late at night, I headed back to the city where I had lived and worked for years. I arrived late, checked into a cheap hotel, and dropped off my gear. Then I texted Brian to let him know I was safe and planned to visit Peterson Sr. at the hospital. By the time I arrived, visiting hours were over, just as I wanted. My beard and long hair would help obscure my identity from many security cameras. I knew the hospital layout well and had already confirmed Peterson Sr. was in room 319 on the 3rd floor. I avoided security, slipped into the restroom, and waited until the coast was clear. I made my way to room 319, where I found Peterson Sr. pale and hooked up to monitors. I must have dozed off for about 15 minutes, only to be awakened by a nurse checking on him. After she left, I stepped out of the restroom quietly. Peterson Sr. startled me by speaking first. "Come closer. Let me see the face of my butcher, Mr. Sands," he said shakily. I turned on a small light, and he seemed surprised. "So Sands farms out his work now? What a gutless fool." "Get on with it," he sneered. "I'm not here to eliminate you, old man," I said. Recognizing my voice, he asked, "Easton, is that you?" He began to weep, but they were tears of relief, not pain. This was not the reaction I expected. Despite our past, Peterson Sr. seemed genuinely glad I was alive. We talked until morning, and I left the hospital with 2 valuable things: a key to a safety deposit box and crucial information. Back at the motel, I texted Brian and got some sleep. Waking up at 11 a.m., I showered, ate, and called the hospital. Peterson Sr. confirmed that I could access safe deposit box 112 under my new identity, Justin Green. Before heading to the bank, I stopped at a barbershop to shave my head and beard. I wasn't hiding anymore. Even with the change, you'd have to look twice to recognize me. I was leaner and more muscular. At the bank, I was treated like a VIP. After accessing the box, I took everything: a large envelope and a significant amount of money. I returned to the motel, grabbed some takeout, and sat down to think. My conversation with Peterson Sr. had been eye-opening. Since my end of life, things had escalated quickly for Greg Sands. With Doug and me out of the picture, the general had become Sandman's main target. After I called Kelly that night, she didn't run away. She ran straight into Sandman's arms. Rumor had it she was telling people that I had abandoned her when I died. Sandman and Kelly were thrilled to be together, though Sandman was frustrated he couldn't personally take me down. With me out of the way, only General Bates remained as a problem. Peterson Sr. assured me the report in the safety deposit box would explain everything. He was furious and grieving over his son's end of life, but even with all his money and power, he couldn't get to Sandman. He had started a reinvestigation into both Sandman and Kelly Bates. Kelly had quickly dropped the Easton name, and this time Peterson spared no expense. Initially, he planned to use me as a weapon against them, but then I died. Before his heart attack, Peterson Sr. had been planning to hire some shady characters to deal with Sandman. When I showed up, he decided to help me instead, believing my revenge-fueled determination could succeed where money couldn't. He called it bloodlust and had more confidence in me than I did. I took the key and promised to keep him informed. Sitting in front of the thick report, I started reading. Much of it was information I already knew, but it added details that made me realize how thoroughly I had been played. Peterson Sr. must have spent a fortune on it. Greg Sands and Kelly Bates were instantly attracted to each other years ago. The hatred between General Bates and Sandman was real, but contrary to earlier reports, Kelly hadn't refused to marry Sandman. Instead, they planned to elope, with Sandman leaving the army to become a cop. However, General Bates discovered the plan and had Sandman's unit deployed to the Middle East, hoping he'd be liquidated in action. When Kelly kept writing to Sandman, declaring her love, the general threatened to have him brought back in a body bag if she continued. In a rare act of selflessness, Kelly broke things off, fearing her father would make good on his threat. Heartbroken, Sandman hoped to reconnect with Kelly during R&R, but the general sent his unit into a deadly mission instead. Although Sandman survived, he was forever changed. After the general was forced to resign, Kelly never forgave him, and Sandman's rage resurfaced. Liquidating became his outlet, and his military training made him effective. As for me, I was just a pawn. Kelly, close to her cousin Susan, knew all about me through Sandman. She came to the festival with the intention of marrying me as a means to stay connected to Sandman. When the marriage lasted longer than she intended, she tried to push me away by denying closeness, hoping I'd leave. Her ultimate goal was for Sandman to return, become jealous, and reclaim her. Much of the report's information came from Susan Peterson, who, bitter over Doug's end of life, revealed everything Kelly had confided in her. Sandman returned to civilian life, seeking both Kelly and revenge on the general. When he found Kelly again, they resumed their relationship, and she became pregnant. Kelly then hinted at an affair with Doug Peterson to provoke me into either liquidating him or divorcing her, clearing the way for her and Sandman. When I approached Sandman for help, He saw an opportunity. He doctored the report on Kelly to keep me distracted, then planned to frame Doug for pill charges. Once that was done, Sandman intended to ally with Peterson Sr. by getting Doug off the charges and using him to destroy General Bates. The plan fell apart when Kelly told me she was pregnant because no one knew I was sterile. That confirmed her cheating, and I knew it had to be with Sandman since Doug's involvement was fake. I wanted quick revenge for both Sandman's lies and Kelly's betrayal. I realized Sandman was setting up Doug to push me into action, so I decided to protect Doug out of spite. At the time, I didn't realize how crucial Doug was to Kelly and Sandman's plan to eliminate me. When Doug vanished, Sandman was enraged and hunted him down. After torturing Doug, he discovered I had sabotaged his plan to get the general. In his fury, he sent me the video package, trying to provoke me into making a reckless move he could exploit. Complicating things, my call to warn Kelly inadvertently tipped off Sandman that I had left the city. She informed him, and he started searching for me. Only my quick thinking and Brian's help kept me and my family safe. When I faked my self-destruction, they were thrilled, and I became irrelevant, allowing Sandman to focus on the general. It seems Kelly and Sandman caught wind of people asking questions. They figured out Susan had talked and decided to eliminate her. Susan thought her money would protect her, but they saw an opportunity to remove her and the general without suspicion. They didn't care if Kelly's mother, aunt, and uncle died too. Susan went out for the evening, and when she returned, Sandman was waiting. He broke her neck, making it look like she had fallen down the stairs while drunk. Then they tampered with the general's car, ensuring it crashed on the way to Susan's funeral. Just like that, the Bates family was gone, and Kelly inherited everything: wealth and political connections. Sandman had taken out all his enemies except Peterson Sr. After a brief mourning period, Kelly and Sandman married. The only glitch was Kelly's mishap. Whether it was a natural loss or deliberate because they suspected the baby wasn't Sandman's, I don't know. Sandman likely planned to get rid of Peterson Sr. next, but the heart attack probably felt like a lucky break, as it could eliminate him off without their involvement. Reflecting on all this, I considered walking away. But then I thought about my mom, dad, and sister. If Sandman got bored, he might target the rest of the Easton family too. No, I decided. As my dad always said, when you've got a diseased dog, the most humane thing to do is put him down. I woke up the next morning wondering if it would be my last day. After a shower, I called Brian and updated him on my plan. I'm going to ambush Sandman at the Bates mansion. He and Kelly moved in right after her uncle and aunt died, and Sandman is on leave, so he should be there, I explained. I thanked Brian again for everything, and he promised to take care of my family, including Jess, if things went wrong. I spent the rest of the day resting and preparing. Once it was dark, I dressed in black, checked my weapon one last time, and left the motel. Driving through town, I reflected on my past with Sandman and how it had come to this. I parked far from the Bates house, grabbed my gear, and made my way to the mansion. Knowing the layout from my high school days with Susan, I reached the perimeter quickly. Using night vision equipment, I saw Kelly leaving in her BMW. I waited 5 minutes to ensure she didn't return before approaching the house. Peeking through a window, I saw Sandman in the dining room with a glass of wine. I quietly entered through the garage and crawled into the kitchen, staying low. Sandman was at the dining table with his back to me, engrossed in some papers. I prepared myself mentally, knowing I might have to shoot him in the back. As I raised my weapon, Sandman somehow sensed me and hit the floor. My first shot missed, and he fired back, hitting my shoulder. Pain shot through me as I realized he was armed, even on leave. I knew I was outmatched and made a run for the garage door, firing for cover. Suddenly the lights went out and I tripped. 4 shots hit the door where I had just been. Fear gripped me. Sandman was coming for me and I was losing blood. I decided to go out fighting. I fired blindly toward where I thought he might be, but I heard nothing. Then the driveway lights came on, revealing Sandman on the floor, dazed from a graze to the head. A knife lay between us, and as I reached for it, Sandman regained consciousness. "Never bring a knife to a weapon fight, Roger," he taunted. But before he could act, blood splattered as Sandman fell dead. Brian had arrived just in time. He dragged me outside, stopped my bleeding, and went back into the house for a few minutes before driving us away at high speed. When I woke up, I was at Brian's house, sore but alive, thanks to a retired doctor friend of his. I had been unconscious for days, but Sandman was dead. I returned to the cabin with Jess to recover and followed the news about Greg Sands' end of life. The police concluded that 2 armed intruders had ambushed him, and there were no leads. Brian had erased the evidence during those crucial 5 minutes, and Sandman was given a hero's funeral. But dead was dead. I planned to confront Kelly, but she knocked me to it. True to her selfish nature, she took her own life with Sandman's weapon, leaving a note saying she couldn't live without him. It felt hollow that I didn't get to end it on my terms, but she always stayed one step ahead. Now, I'm driving to Brian's beach house with Jess beside me for a family reunion. Roger Easton remains dead, but Jess doesn't care as long as Justin Green survives. As I drive, I reflect on love, friendship, and betrayal. The past is the past. It doesn't define the future. I will survive.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Edward Bishop was born in a small, struggling farming community in eastern Oregon, where his family's story was anything but idyllic. His father, Alistair, had inherited a modest parcel of land from his grandfather. With a burst of youthful optimism, Alistair convinced his wife, Marlene, to move there and build a life as farmers. Unfortunately, farming wasn't Alistair's calling. The only things he managed to cultivate were debts and frustration. Eventually, he left Marlene for a waitress from a bar, one not too different from the one Edward found himself sitting in now. Marlene, unwilling to stay in a dead-end situation, took 7-year-old Edward and moved to Portland. She divorced Alistair but chose to keep Edward's surname as a reminder of his father's legacy, for better or worse. In Portland, Marlene took a job as a receptionist and administrative assistant at a downtown bank to make ends meet. Determined to pursue her lifelong dream of becoming a nurse, she enrolled in classes at PSU, balancing work, study, and motherhood with quiet resilience. Unfortunately, life had other plans. When Edward was 10, tragedy struck. On her way to work one morning, Marlene's car was broadsided by a truck on the bridge. The impact sent her vehicle over the railing and into the water below. It took a full day to recover her body. She hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. Just like that, her life was over, and Edward's world was turned upside down. With no immediate family to take him in, Edward was thrust into the foster care system. For the next 7 years, he drifted through a series of homes along the Portland-Salem corridor, each one more temporary than the last. Stability was a distant dream. He developed a knack for survival, though it often got him into trouble. Fights became routine, and petty thefts added to his growing reputation as a troubled kid. It all reached a breaking point when Edward turned 17, forcing him to confront the path his life was hurtling down. Ever since the death of his mother, whom he had loved deeply, Edward had felt alone and empty. In an attempt to fill that emptiness within himself, he joined various gangs and took to the lifestyle like a duck to water. It didn't fill the emptiness, didn't even come close, but while he was with them, he could pretend like he was part of something larger, something beyond himself. The criminal acts, the drugs, the stealing of merchandise, none of that stuff was all that important. It was merely the outward show of solidarity you took away with you. Yeah, man, we're together in all this, and we always will be. It wasn't the acts themselves that were important, it was the spirit behind them. Doing things as a gang, and getting away with it, drawing the bonds of loyalty and solidarity even tighter. Well, that's what he told himself anyway. Even though his less-than-educated mind couldn't articulate the concepts, that was what he felt. Until he was 17. He and the guys had decided it would be a good idea to burn down the police station. Not a smart move, in retrospect, but hell, what the hell, it'd be a blast, right? Well, the cops that caught them didn't see the humor in the situation, so they were all packed up and sent off to jail until they were 21. Jail taught him things. It wasn't at all like in the movies, but it wasn't that great either. Edward quickly got status, and he got respect when word got out that he was in there for burning down a police station. He did his time, got out with a few scars, and started bumming all over the Pacific Northwest looking for odd jobs. Edward always laughed when he saw stories in the paper about work being hard to find, and when he saw stories on the news about the unemployment rate being so high. Jobs were all over the place. The real problem was that nobody wanted to get their hands dirty doing them. Edward might have been a criminal, but he wasn't averse to hard work, not at all. Hell, he liked spending money as much as the next guy. So, it was over to Eastern Washington to pick apples, up to Seattle to work in the fish market, down to Pendleton to work on the ranches, lots of dirty back-breaking work, but it was honest work, and he always had some cash. And he laughed at all the out-of-work, white-collar idiots who bitched and moaned on the TV about there being no work, while he nursed blisters on his hands from digging fence post holes. That carried him for the next 10 years, right up until about 1995. And it was the goddamnedest piece of good luck that ended it for him. He was walking along a country road in central Washington and had come across a damn fine-looking sports car stranded on the side of the road. Smoke raftered up from the tailpipe in thick clouds, and steam gushed from under the hood. And standing next to it was the sexiest woman he had ever seen in his life. "Looks like you got a problem there, ma'am," Edward said, standing far enough away so that he wasn't perceived as a threat. The woman jumped and turned, hands going up a little defensively before she saw that he was at a safe distance. "Yeah, something went bang under the hood and I stalled out. I'm on my way to Wenatchee and I think I got turned around." Edward laughed. "You sure did. It's off that way, and you're heading the complete opposite direction." The woman smiled ruefully. "I was never any great shakes at navigation. Want me to look under the hood there for you?" She studied him for a moment. "Do I have to be worried about you?" "Not today," Edward said, trying to look harmless. Not easy when you're a big bruiser with red hands and 3 days' growth of beard, but he did try, and it seemed to work because she eventually let him look under the hood. To cut a long story short, he fixed her broken pistons and she fixed his wandering life. All those years on the road had made Edward fairly well acquainted with the female body and all its wondrous permutations, but nobody turned over his motor like Laura Parker did. They dated for a year before they got married. She was insatiable. Laura's father owned a construction company and, in an ironic twist of fate, it turned out that Edward had done work for one of Old Man Parker's crews before, and they told the old man that he was reliable and always got the job done. So, Edward hired on there, first as a plain old carpenter, and then later as a foreman, and later still he was helping expand the business in the front office. He and Laura married a year after that initial meeting on that dusty road, and they never looked back. Things coasted along for the next 10 years. Edward was fat, dumb, and happy, and he had no idea things were anything but peachy keen. Money was rolling in from the business. Laura's father had retired and Edward was running the thing single-handedly by 2000. And they were trying for kids, but not having much luck. And then an overheard conversation changed it all. Now, sitting at Sammy's Roadhouse and nursing his beer, Edward thought back to the day, just 2 days ago, when he first realized his Laura was a cheating 304. It was an ordinary day, as so many days when momentous events occur are. Edward got up, made love to his wife, had his shower, drank his coffee, kissed his wife goodbye, and headed for the office tower his construction business was based out of. It had sure come a long way from the old rundown trailer it had started out in. Things went along until about 10 in the morning when Edward got up to get a cup of coffee from the break room. He was just about to step through the door when the sound of his wife's name stopped him cold in the hallway. "Does Edward know about Laura?" came the voice of Jim Fredericks, a roofer Edward worked with. A laugh. "Not hardly. You think he'd put up with it if he did?" answered Ralph Billings, one of their subcontractors. "Good point. So, who's she doing now?" "I think she's got Jack Sullivan over tomorrow. Boss says he's going out of town to Portland." Another laugh from Ralph. "Boy, I sure wouldn't like to be Laura or Jack tomorrow if Edward ever found out." Turning, Edward left on a gale of their shared laughter and went back to his office, coffee forgotten. His wife was cheating on him, had apparently been doing it for a long time. At that moment, Edward was numb. He sat there behind his desk with his head in his hands, staring at the desktop. Then, slowly, all the questions started running through his head. How could she do this to me? What's wrong with me? Am I that bad a lover that she needs to find it elsewhere? Does our marriage mean nothing to her? How could she toss 10 years of marriage down the crapper without a thought? Then the anger came. She wanted to play around? Well, fine then. But she would have to pay the consequences. It was then that the germ of the plan began to form in his mind. A slow smile came across his face. Yes, things would be different in the Bishop house soon. Very soon indeed. Edward finished off his beer, threw a tin on the bar, and got up and headed for the door. He had an appointment to keep at his house. It was 4:30, and he was supposed to be in Portland until tomorrow, meeting with potential investors at the Embassy Suites. He had called Paul Richardson that morning and got him to go in his place. Paul was his executive assistant, as well as his partner in the business, and would be more than happy to prove his worth on this money-finding trip. Meanwhile, Edward did all the usual things a cucked husband did: empty the savings account, cashed in the CDs, and empties the safety deposit box. Luckily, they had a prenuptial agreement, or Laura would get half the business. Just to be sure, he got a copy of that too out of the office safe and planned to include it in the divorce papers. Then he had gone to Sammy's and sat and drank, and contemplated his plan. Laura Bishop sighed contentedly as Jack Sullivan's lips grazed over her. "Nobody does me like you do," she murmured into his thick hair. Never mind all that. I want you now, Laura said. Pulling him up, Jack grinned. Your wish is my command. My little married 304. But before he could do anything, there was an ominous crunch. Sound and the voice of Edward Bishop said, "Well, isn't this cozy?" from the doorway. Laura shrieked and fell off the bed. Jack stood shocked. He spun around and lost his balance, falling off the other side of the bed. He looked ludicrous, like a turtle on his back. "Seems my loving wife has been very naughty indeed," said Edward in a calm, almost gentle voice, advancing into the room with a 10-gauge shotgun cradled in his hands, pointed straight at Jack, who was frantically trying to scramble off the floor and cover up his nakedness at the same time. "Edward, it isn't what you think." "Be quiet, Laura," Edward said in his new calm and gentle voice, not looking at her, but gaze trained steadily on Jack, who was standing, back against the wall and hands over his crotch, cringing away from the barrel of the shotgun, which looked roughly the diameter of a drainpipe. "But Edward—" "I said be quiet," Edward said in his calm and gentle voice. "You'll get your turn soon enough, my darling wife. It's time for me and old Jackie here to have a serious discussion now. What are you going to do?" Edward ignored Jack's question and continued to stand there, cradling the shotgun and looking at him interestedly, like he was a new bug on a microscope. "You like to screw other men's wives," he said conversationally, as if he had said something of no more importance than "it's going to rain today." "It wasn't my idea," Jack babbled. "She came on to me and—" "You like to screw other men's wives, and it makes you feel like a right old tomcat and lady killer, doesn't it, Jackie old chum? Makes you feel like you still got the stuff. Makes you feel like you still got what it takes. Isn't that right, my good little buddy?" Jack said nothing, but continued to stare at the gun. Edward deliberately moved his hand to the trigger. "Yes, yes, whatever you say." Jack screamed, a jet of urine spurting out of him. "Well now, that's good," said Edward, still sounding conversational and ignoring the small puddle at Jack's feet. "And you could have gone right on feeling that way, except you picked the wrong man's wife to screw, my friend." "Edward, please, can't we talk about this?" Laura asked, huddled in a trembling heap on the side of the bed. "One more time, Laura, be quiet or I'll gag you," Edward said, still not looking at her. "Now, you like to screw other men's wives. We already established that," Edward said, still addressing a trembling Jack. "But you also like to screw other men's wives, and especially my wife. I can't let that go unpunished, good buddy," Edward said. The tone was regretful, but Jack could have sworn he saw sadistic glee floating in the man's eyes. "Walk with me, Jack old buddy. And Laura, you sit right there and don't move. You're in enough trouble already. You mind me now." Laura didn't answer as Edward led Jack out the bedroom door, but continued to sit there as directed. Edward thought he would have to carry Jack. His knees were shaking so bad. He could almost feel sorry for the son of a bitch, had he not caught him doing what he was doing. He prodded Jack into the kitchen, where there was a coil of chain and a pair of handcuffs dangling from a ring bolt in the wall. "Snap the bracelets on, old chum," he said, prodding Jack in the back with the barrel of the shotgun. Jack squeaked and jerked away from the touch of the cold metal and hurriedly snapped the handcuffs on. Edward was mildly disgusted. The guy didn't even try to fight. Why was Laura cavorting with this a-hole? Because the length of chain was so short. Once Jack had snapped the cuffs on, he was left bending over the counter, on his toes. "Now, since you like to screw my wife, I think it time I did you the same favor. Allow me to introduce you to Mr. Remington. You're about to get to know him very well," said Edward amiably. Jack heard the thud of his boots advancing across the kitchen, and he began to bawl. "Please, Mr. Bishop, I'm sorry, please don't do it," he blubbered, snot and tears dripping onto the counter. Edward ignored him, but allowed a slight grimace of distaste to cross his face. "God, what a chicken." Jack began whipsawing wildly, trying to break the hold the cuffs had on him, but succeeded only in banging his face on the counter. He glanced fearfully over his shoulder and saw Edward looming up behind him, the shotgun glistening in his hands. The barrel looked bigger than a drainpipe now. It looked like a light pole aiming for his butt. And then, without a word, it went in 3 inches. Jack screamed. He screamed very loudly indeed. It withdrew and slammed him again, eliciting another scream. Blood glistened on the end of the barrel as Edward slammed it in one more time. "You like screwing my wife?" he said into Jack's ear, his hot breath sounding like a bull getting ready to charge. "How do you like it, my good little friend? Is Mr. Remington taking good care of you? Is he?" Jack screamed and cried, and Edward grinned. his face hanging over Jack's shoulder reflected in the gleaming pots in front of him like a Halloween mask. Jack prayed for it to be over. The pain was excruciating, and he just wanted it to stop. Mercifully, it did. Edward withdrew the shotgun barrel and stood back, studying Jack dispassionately as he hung from his now bleeding wrists and sobbed. Like that, old buddy? Like getting screwed? Is it as marvelous from the other end as you seem to think it must be? She asked for it. Honest she did, Jack whimpered. Edward ignored this. You're going to think twice about screwing another man's wife. Isn't that right? Yes, whatever you say, Edward, Jack said, now seeing a ray of hope for getting out of this alive. Well, that's fine then, said Edward. But you still have one more lesson to learn, my friend. Please, let me go, Edward. I'll leave town, lick your shoes. Whatever you say, just let me go. Oh no, we're not done yet. You still have to learn, Edward said soothingly, as though talking to a child. He came around and unlocked the handcuffs, not troubling to stay out of Jack's reach. The little a-hole wouldn't do anything. Turn around, Jack. You still have to say hi to Mr. Remington. Jack turned. The pain was now secondary to his fear. He was sure he was about to die. The shotgun barrel loomed in front of him. Open your mouth. Now. Trembling more violently still, Jack opened his mouth and Edward slid the barrel in. Jack nearly vomited, but held it in. He was sure mild-mannered Edward Bishop had gone insane, and he didn't want to do anything else to provoke him. So, he closed his eyes and held on to the counter behind him. Open your eyes, Jack. Open them now, Edward said, almost crooning. Slowly, Jack opened his eyes. The barrel felt slimy and oily and dirty in his mouth. Edward's red hand grasped the stock. His finger moved deliberately toward the trigger. Jack watched in horrid fascination as it crept inch by inch. He's about ready to come, Edward crooned at Jack, staring directly into his eyes as his finger inched toward the trigger. Can't you feel him pulsing, getting ready to blow at you, Jackie? Can you feel it? See how wonderful this can be, you son of a bitch. And then Edward's finger found the trigger and pulled it. There was a click. The gun wasn't loaded, but Jack fainted dead away, collapsing onto the floor, his bladder letting go all at once. He came around a couple seconds later, sure he was dead, and then the tip of Edward's steel-toed workboat slammed into his nuts, and he felt nothing but fiery agony bellowing up from his crotch and into his belly. Get out of here once you got your wind back, Edward said, administering one final savage kick to Jack's ribs. If I still find you here once I get back from dealing with my loving wife, I'll load the gun for real and shoot me a trespasser. Jack nodded as best he could and crawled toward the door. He was still naked, but all he wanted right then was to get away from this madman. Edward turned away from the writhing mass on the floor and headed deliberately for the stairs. He had a loving wife to visit. Laura was still sitting there on the side of the bed. She had heard Jack's screams echoing up the stairs, but hadn't dared move. In all the years she had been married to Edward, she had never once been afraid of him. She was terrified now. Edward stood and leaned against the closet door, as far away from Laura as he could get. Why, was all he said. What did you do to Jack? Laura asked. You're in no position to ask questions. Why did you cheat on me? Laura started crying at the pure venom she heard in his voice. Edward, I love you. Can't we be reasonable about this? You brought a bunch of men into our house and screwed them on our bed, you bitch. Why did you do that? You answer my questions, and maybe I'll think about answering yours. He didn't raise his voice, and his biting words were all the more compelling for that. It was just sex. I just wanted something different. You weren't supposed to find out, she babbled, hunching in on herself. I never wanted to hurt you, Edward, honest. Well, that's just grand, isn't it? Edward said, pacing in a big circle and clenching his fists. You didn't want to hurt me, and I wasn't supposed to find out. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too, and who gives a shit if you toss our marriage down the goddamn drain? Isn't that right? Hell, you're not even sorry for cheating. You're only sorry you got caught. Laura could only sob. How could she tell him that it was the thrill of the chase, the excitement of strange men that motivated her? She loved Edward, she really did. But he could only give her so much. But Edward had figured it out, and he crushed all hope of reconciliation with his next statement. It's not even the sex for you, is it, Laura? I mean, Jack Sullivan? He's a stupid accountant. It's the cheap thrill for you, isn't that right? Laura said nothing, but continued to cry. You disgust me, Edward said, slumping as though all the fight had gone out of him. He really had loved this woman once, would have done anything for her. You threw your marriage away because you can't remember that you're a grown-up and not 16 anymore. Get dressed and get the hell out of here. Maybe you can kiss Jack Sullivan all better, he sneered, leaving the room and heading downstairs. Sure enough, Jackie Boy was gone, leaving only a trail of blood behind. Goddamn spineless. Edward cleaned it up, listening with half an ear as Laura scurried around upstairs, hopefully packing a bag. He took the ring bolt off the wall and brought it back into the garage with the chain and cuffs, and stored them back in his toolbox. He had let the inner animal out, the one who was always in charge back in his gang days when there was a rumble on, and putting him back to sleep was tough. His hands shook and his head throbbed. When he got back in, Laura was heading out the front door with a suitcase. She threw him a sad look, which he ignored, before closing it, more tears staining her cheeks. Stupid, faithless bitch. Edward never heard from her directly again. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Jack Sullivan had vanished, leaving Washington behind without a trace. Laura fled to California, and word reached Edward through his contacts that she had taken up the life of a biker groupie. During the divorce proceedings, Laura bombarded Edward's voicemail with countless messages, pleading with him to reconsider. She promised to change, begged for another chance, and even offered assurances that he could set the terms to keep her in line. But Edward refused to entertain the idea. Once trust was shattered, it was gone for good. He knew there would be no rebuilding it, no way to erase the doubts. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life questioning every missed call, every late night, or every suspicious mark on her clothes. Instead, he deleted her messages and let the lawyers handle everything. When it was finally over, Edward's life returned to its usual rhythm. His business continued to thrive, and he kept up his habit of joining his crews on job sites. Yet, a nagging question lingered in the back of his mind. How many of these guys had Laura been with? It was a question he never dared to investigate, preferring the peace of ignorance over the torment of knowing. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.